Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into a time period so unsettling it makes modern horror movies look like cheerful children's programming. Because tonight, we're diving into Victorian England, a place where people politely said good evening while casually participating in rituals, habits, and daily routines that would get all of us put on several government watch lists today. Before we drift into this warm bath of historical nightmare fuel, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if this brand of strange, sleepy chaos truly makes you happy. And thank you for suggesting this topic. It was such a fun one to explore with you. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. Someone out there is definitely hearing this at 2:43 a.m, quietly debating whether they should get a glass of water. Spoiler, they won't. Now dim those lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise comfort, bundle up and tuck your toes in, because Victorians believed in a lot of things, but good hygiene and personal safety were not among them. Let's get curious for a second. Have you ever wondered why Victorians kept human hair as decor? Or why did they use poisonous wallpaper even after it started killing children? Or why their medical treatments were essentially, have you tried bleeding more? Did people actually walk around wearing jewellery made from the deceased? Why did they photograph corpses like it was a family holiday card? And what was going on with all the seances? Were Victorians lonely, bored, or just aggressively curious about ghosts? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up at 1864. You're wearing uncomfortable wool, everything smells faintly of coal smoke, and the wallpaper in your bedroom is actively trying to poison you. Good luck. Victorians had an emotional support hobby that involved posing corpses like they were still alive. You wake up to discover that family portraits. Here are less holiday cheer and more grandma, but rigid. It's totally normal, unsettlingly normal, to prop up Uncle Arthur with wires, comb his hair and say cheese. Let's talk about the room you've just walked into, because sensory overload doesn't even begin to describe it. The curtains are drawn, the furniture is draped in black cloth, and every relative is dressed like they're auditioning for the role of sorrowful person number 3 in a dramatic stage production. There's a faint smell of lavender, candle wax, and something else you don't want to identify. The photographer is setting up a massive camera that looks like a wooden suitcase married to a telescope. He's humming softly, way too softly for someone about to photograph a corpse. Victorians didn't treat death the way we do. Today we hide it behind closed doors and politely pretend it doesn't exist until a life insurance commercial comes on. But here, death is practically a family hobby. You don't just mourn someone, you preserve them in a family album so future generations can look back and say, "Ah yes, this is the one who died of gout," as if that's helpful context. The photographer gestures for you to scoot closer to the body. "Closer," he whispers, "like you're posing for Vogue." You inch forward, trying not to make eye contact with Uncle Arthur's very open, very glassy eyes. Someone has propped him into a seated position, using an elaborate system of metal stands hidden behind his suit jacket. It's like Victorian engineering at its creepiest. You're afraid to breathe too hard in case he topples over. Victorian families saw death portraits as a final chance, a moment to capture a person at their best after a long illness. They touch up the cheeks with rouge, comb the hair, tie a nice bow tie, and sometimes even paint pupils onto closed eyelids. Imagine staring lovingly at your grandmother's portrait, only to realise someone drew cartoon eyes on her. Nothing says fond remembrance like a DIY art project on a corpse. Let's talk poses. There's the classic sleeping angel, where children are arranged to look like they're peacefully napping. There's leaning casually, which usually means the photographer has secretly tied the body to a chair with a rope, and then there's the truly iconic pose, standing upright. To achieve this, the photographer uses something called a posing stand, a metal device designed to hold a living person still during long exposures. Victorians, being Victorian, thought, why not? Let's use it on dead people too. So now Uncle Arthur looks like he's about to deliver a TED talk on 19th century tax policy. You watch as the photographer removes the lens cap and begins the long exposure. Everyone freezes, absolutely still. The live relatives are holding their breath. Uncle Arthur is well, doing great at not moving. The room is silent except for the faint clicking of the camera mechanism and the occasional sniffle. It feels more like a séance than photography. But here's where it gets weird. The living sometimes look more unsettling than the dead. Because they had to hold still for so long, any tiny twitch could blur their faces. Meanwhile, Uncle Arthur isn't going anywhere. So in the final photo he looks crisp, serene, and oddly photogenic, and you look like a chaotic shadow creature caught mid-sneeze. When the photograph is finally done, the family crowds around you proudly. Someone hands you a small tin case with a picture inside, like a gift bag. You stare at it, wondering how you ended up in a historical moment where the dead are more camera-ready than you. Victorian death photography wasn't meant to be terrifying. It was meant to be comforting, proof that a loved one existed, that they were cherished, that they were part of the family even in death. But as you stand there beside a very still Uncle Arthur, you can't help thinking modern photo albums have one significant advantage. Everyone in them is alive. You've barely stepped outside before someone compliments your necklace, and you realise it's braided from Aunt Mildred's actual hair. Victorians collected hair the way we collect keychains, except these souvenirs used to have opinions. Let's talk about what's currently hanging around your neck, because it's less fashion accessory and more lightly cursed family heirloom. Victorian jewellery is beautiful at a distance, sure, but up close you can see it. Tiny woven loops of hair, meticulously braided like the world's most unsettling friendship bracelet. You hold it between your fingers and immediately regret making physical contact. The texture is unmistakable. It's soft, familiar, and objectively wrong. This isn't metal or gemstone. It's Mildred. Victorians saw hair as a perfect keepsake. It didn't decay quickly, it was sentimental, and it could be turned into shockingly intricate designs. Some families even kept little clippings of hair in albums labelled like Pokemon cards. But instead of holographic Charizard, it was Uncle Herbert, 1852. You flip open one such album and find pages upon pages of lovingly displayed locks. Some are tied with ribbon, some are braided into flowers. All of them feel like they belong in a museum exhibit titled Items That Would Terrify a Modern Therapist. As you walk through the parlour, you notice more hair art everywhere. There's a wreath made entirely of strands from multiple family members. It looks delicate, lacy, and surprisingly beautiful, until you remember each piece belonged to someone who used to shout at children for running too fast indoors. Victorians hung these wreaths on their walls like we hang inspirational quotes. You can only imagine the conversations. Oh yes, that's mother, father, and all 7 cousins, woven together like a fuzzy symbol of familial love. You nod politely and try not to think about the hygiene implications. Let's take a closer look at how these pieces were made, because Victorian mourning jewellery wasn't slapped together. It took technique. You watch as a woman carefully threads hair into a complicated loom-like contraption, her fingers moving with the precision of someone tying knots in a spider web. There are patterns, charts, and special tools. This isn't a craft, it's a commitment. The final result might be a bracelet, a brooch, a locket with a swirl of hair inside, or even a ring. Yes, a ring. Imagine proposing with something that whispers till death and beyond. Of course, there's a reason hair jewellery became so popular. Victorian mourning culture was intense. When someone died, grief wasn't just emotional, it was scheduled. You wore black for months or years, attended sombre gatherings, and collected memories that could be displayed without decaying on the mantle. Hair was the obvious choice. It was personal, unique, and perfectly suited to crafting tiny, slightly haunted treasures. You watch as a mother hands her daughter a small locket. Inside is a curl from the girl's deceased brother. The child opens it reverently, as if it's a treasure chest. It's touching, but also a little like wearing someone's DNA around your neck like a charm against sadness. Victorians didn't shy away from the physical remnants of loved ones. In fact, they leaned into it. Death wasn't tucked away politely. It was brought into daily life, braided, polished, and turned into accessories that could be passed down through generations. That brooch you're wearing, someone will inherit it one day and say, "Ah yes, a piece of Great-Aunt Mildred. How lovely, how textured." Before you leave the house, someone asks if you'd like your own mourning piece made. Just in case, they say, cheerfully. They gesture to a glass jar labelled Hair for Future Projects, filled with a suspiciously large collection of cut locks. You decline, politely but firmly, while clutching the necklace you can't remove without offending Mildred's memory or her family. As you step outside into the smoky Victorian air, you can't help thinking, in a time before photography was widespread, this was how people held on to the ones they loved. It was eerie, yes, but also sincere. A tangible reminder that someone existed, someone mattered, someone was mourned. Still, you'll be wearing turtlenecks for a while, just to avoid any more compliments on your human hair accessories. Your bedroom wallpaper glows with a suspicious emerald shimmer. That's not art. That's arsenic. Every breath is a romantic Victorian flirtation with death, and you can't open a window because the air outside is also poison. Charming. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how aggressively toxic your bedroom is. The walls aren't merely decorated, they're participating in your slow demise. The green pigment you're staring at, Sheely's green, is the Victorian equivalent of saying, what if home decor also bit back? It was cheap, it was trendy, and it killed people with the casual enthusiasm of a badly wired toaster in a college dorm. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, you notice the wallpaper almost seems to glow. That's not ambience. That is a chemical warning sign. The air tastes faintly sweet, metallic, and deeply concerning. It's like sucking on a penny dipped in sadness. Even the wallpaper pattern, curling vines and innocent flowers, feels sinister. Like nature decided to commit small, fashionable homicides. Victorians adored this colour. They printed it on wallpaper, dresses, toys, book covers, artificial flowers, and pretty much anything else they could wrap in poison. Meanwhile, you're standing here, taking tiny, shallow breaths, trying not to commit to a full inhalation, because you're not ready for your lungs to reenact a Victorian tragedy. Let's talk about humidity. Victorian homes were famously damp when the air got moist, and it always did. The arsenic in the wallpaper released a fine dust or vapour. Imagine the world's worst air freshener. You roll over in bed, and a little puff of toxic cheer wafts into your face. Congratulations, your walls have chloroformed you with vintage style. Now consider the furniture. Heavy drapes, thick carpets, upholstered chairs. All of them help trap the poison, keeping it cosy and warm, like the Victorian version of an essential oil diffuser, but significantly more lethal. You lean close to examine the pattern and immediately regret it. The wallpaper crinkles under your breath, as if delighted you've wandered close enough for a nibble. Your landlady proudly tells you the colour is modern and fashion-forward. Victorians use terms like that to justify mistakes. She says the room has a healthy atmosphere, which, in 1864, means no one has died here recently. You nod politely, while scanning for the nearest exit in case the wallpaper begins speaking in tongues. You attempt to open the window for ventilation, but Victorian London air is its own special brand of threat. Outside, coal smoke hangs so thick you could slice it and serve it on toast. So now you must choose between arsenic vapour or inhaling a lungful of industrial sorrow. You weigh your options and decide sleep is optional anyway. Let's shift to the daily symptoms you're experiencing. The headache, wallpaper, the nausea, wallpaper, the weird tingling feeling in your fingertips, wallpaper. Victorian doctors, of course, blamed everything on your constitution, nerves, or the phases of the moon. Not once did they consider the possibility that the room was essentially a slow cooker of death set to simmer. Children were especially vulnerable. Many nursery walls were decorated with cheerful arsenic-drenched patterns so infants could drift off to sleep while marinating in toxins. Parents thought the faint greenish powder collecting along the baseboards was dust, not chemical warfare, disguised as interior design. You notice flakes peeling slightly above your bed. This is the wallpaper's version of shedding skin. You brush one off your blanket and wonder if it counts as ingesting vegetables. Technically, it's green. Even wealthy families weren't immune. There are documented cases of entire households falling mysteriously ill, vomiting, convulsing, fainting, while doctors wrung their hands and muttered something about bad air. Meanwhile, the culprit was right there, stapled to the dining room. As the night deepens, you lie as still as possible, breathing through layers of blankets as if you're hiding from a predator. And in a way, you are. Because nothing says Victorian interior design quite like a beautiful, deadly wall coating. You close your eyes and try to sleep. The wallpaper seems to glow brighter, humming with that cheerful emerald menace. Somewhere in the house, someone coughs weakly. You wonder who will blame the smog first, or the humidity, or your nerves. But you know better. It's the walls. They're gorgeous, they're trendy, and they're all trying to kill you. Welcome to London, where the air is 50% oxygen, 50% industrial sadness. You inhale deeply and immediately regret it. Even your eyelashes taste like soot now. Let's start with the visuals, because the first thing you notice is that you can't notice anything. The world is wrapped in a fog so thick it behaves less like weather and more like a nosy neighbour trying to climb inside your lungs. Buildings fade into the haze like shy Victorian introverts. People shuffle past as shadowy silhouettes, coughing delicately into handkerchiefs, Victorian modesty at its finest, even while inhaling slow-motion doom. This isn't regular fog. This is London particular, a fancy name Victorians gave to their industrial smog, as if branding it made it less deadly. You take a few steps and immediately feel the smoky grit settling onto your skin. It's like someone rubbed charcoal brisket seasoning all over your face. You blink and your tears come out grey. The air smells like a combination of burnt toast, wet dog, and existential despair. Coal smoke pours from chimneys like the city is trying to audition for the role of villain in a Dickens novel. Every home, every factory, every business burns coal. Coal in the fires, coal in the ovens, coal in the locomotives. If something isn't burning coal, Victorians assume it's broken. You pass a baker who proudly displays fresh bread in the window. The loaves look delicious until you realise they are lightly dusted with the same soot that currently coats your lungs. A man bites into one and smiles with his entire mouth blackened, like he's just enjoyed a charcoal whitening strip gone horribly wrong. Breathing becomes a tactical decision. Nose or mouth? Neither seems ideal. The air hits your throat with the softness of sandpaper dipped in regret. You try shallow breaths, but even those feel like inhaling a Victorian-themed barbecue pit. It's like the city collectively decided air should be chewable. Victorians, of course, treat all of this as perfectly normal. Women stroll by under parasols not to block the sun, but to avoid fallout. Men twirl their moustaches proudly, unaware their facial hair now contains enough soot to plant a small vegetable garden. Someone coughs loudly beside you. You can practically hear the coal particles rattling around like dice. Let's talk health. Lung problems are so common they're practically fashion statements. Chronic cough? Welcome to the club. Wheezing? Very on trend. Children working in factories inhale so much smog by age 10, their lungs probably qualify as small cold storage units. Doctors blame bad humours or weak spirits, failing to notice the giant industrial smoke clouds hovering like toxic cumulonimbus trauma. The streets don't make anything easier. Every carriage that rolls by kicks up more soot. Horses trudge through layers of ash so thick their hooves sound squishy. Even the river looks exhausted. Thames water glistens with an iridescent sheen, the kind you normally see right before a cartoon fish mutates legs and walks away. You attempt to find fresh air by ducking into an alley. Bad decision. The smog is somehow denser there, like it's collected for a support meeting. Your eyes burn, your throat scratches. You become keenly aware that Victorians lived their entire lives like this, just casually getting their daily intake of minerals via inhalation. As night falls, the smog deepens into something almost supernatural. Gas lamps flicker weakly, their glow swallowed by the haze before it travels more than a few inches. You begin to understand why Victorian literature is 90% people wandering dark streets, confused and emotionally unstable. They weren't brooding, they just couldn't see. You take one final breath, carefully, reluctantly, and your lungs sigh audibly like two damp accordions. You can practically feel the coal settling into long-term storage. Lovely. And as you stumble home, eyelashes gritty, hair perfumed with industrial melancholy, you realise something. Victorians didn't just live with smog, they accepted it. They inhaled it with their morning tea, folded it into their daily routine, and somehow convinced themselves this was progress. Meanwhile, you're already Googling modern air purifiers in your mind. Victorians loved gathering in dark rooms with strangers to summon spirits like it was community bingo night. You get invited to one before breakfast. No one questions it. You step inside the parlour and immediately realise how serious these people are. Heavy velvet curtains are drawn tight, choking out any trace of daylight. Candles drip dramatically from every corner like they've been instructed to perform anxiety for the audience. There's a round table in the centre, covered with lace, flowers, mysterious stains, and what might be crumbs from last night's séance snacks. The whole room smells like incense, old carpets, and the faint whiff of unresolved trauma. Everyone greets you with slow, knowing nods, the kind people give when they think you also talk to spirits recreationally. A medium floats toward you, not literally, but her feet are moving so silently it makes you suspicious. She wears enough black lace to outfit an entire Gothic choir. Her eyes widen when she learns it's your first séance, and she pats your arm comfortingly, like she's sending you off to prom, but the theme is ghosts and regret. Victorians believed the spirit world was just right there. Like a neighbour you could call up if you needed emotional support, gardening advice, or gossip about the afterlife. And spiritualism wasn't fringe, it was mainstream entertainment. Queen Victoria herself participated in séances, so when someone casually whispers, "Shall we greet the spirits?" the group hums in agreement like they've just been, asked if they want dessert. The medium dims the lights even further, a bold move considering visibility is already at 0. She asks everyone to join hands. Your palms are instantly sweaty, not from fear, but because the man beside you has the temperature of a stale croissant. The table creaks, the candles flicker, and someone across from you gasps with theatrical enthusiasm. Then the medium begins. Her voice drops to a whisper so soft you have to lean in, which is a mistake because now you smell her perfume. A blend of rosewater and something that can only be described as Victorian emotional instability. She calls out to the spirits, begging them to join the circle of mortals who, frankly, do not seem prepared for supernatural responsibility. You wait, you breathe, you wonder whether ghosts appreciate punctuality. Suddenly the table thumps, hard, you jump, everyone else barely reacts, amateurs. This happens all the time, apparently. The medium's eyes roll back dramatically. Woman next to you sobs quietly, which feels premature, but you let her have her moment. The candles flare. A cold draft snakes through the room, even though all the windows are shut tight. You wonder if this is a spirit or just Victorian insulation doing what it always does, failing. Then comes the knocking. 3 sharp taps from the underside of the table, like a ghost politely asking to speak to the manager. The medium asks yes or no questions, and the ghost obligingly knocks in response. Is it Aunt Beatrice? 1 knock for no. Is it the little boy who drowned in the river? 2 knocks. Is it the spirit of the neighbour's deceased spaniel? 3 knocks. Someone gasps. Apparently the spaniel was beloved. Victorians adore drama, and seances provide it in bulk. The flickering lights, the trembling voices, the sudden gusts of wind that totally aren't caused by poorly sealed chimneys, the table shaking as if possessed by the ghost of an overly enthusiastic dinner guest. You're almost, convinced almost, but then you notice that the medium's foot is suspiciously placed near a table leg. A gentle nudge here, a dramatic wobble there. It's theatre, but beautifully executed. A final message comes through, supposedly from the other side. The ghost wants everyone to cherish each day and also stop overcooking lamb. You're impressed. Even in death, Victorians have notes about dinner. As the séance ends, everyone sighs contentedly, like they've just finished a yoga class for confused souls. The medium smiles serenely and hands you a calling card in case you'd like to book a private session. You decline gently because you're not emotionally equipped to pay someone to knock on a table while pretending to be your great-uncle. Stepping back into daylight feels jarring. The air is fresh, the world is clear, and no one is whispering to invisible children. But you know one thing for certain. In Victorian England, talking to the dead isn't weird. Not talking to them is what raises eyebrows. Every child owns a doll that looks like it's plotting something. You swear the one on the mantel just blinked. Victorian parents call this wholesome playtime. You call it a violation of emotional safety. The first thing you notice about Victorian dolls is the eyes. They aren't simply painted on, they're glass, polished, reflective, and deeply committed to making direct, unsettling eye contact at all times. You walk into a parlour and instantly feel judged by a group of tiny porcelain auditors. One doll has curls so perfect they look weaponized. Another has rosy cheeks that suggest mischief. A third appears to be silently evaluating your moral character and finding you lacking. The mantle doll, the one you're convinced just blinked, has those eyelids that move when the head tilts. Victorians thought this was charming, like a playful trick. But when you see it in action, with the slow, mechanical flutter of a creature deciding whether you taste better roasted or raw, you begin to reconsider your stance on indoor toys. Victorian children adore these dolls. They cradle them lovingly, brush their hair, and whisper secrets into ears that probably weren't intended for the living world. Meanwhile, you tiptoe around the room like you're avoiding landmines. Every time you turn your back, you can feel the dolls recalculating their angles, adjusting their positions minutely, just enough to keep you guessing. It doesn't help that Victorian craftsmanship is incredible. These dolls are almost too lifelike. The skin is a pale porcelain that glows faintly in candlelight. The lips are hand-painted into a tiny mysterious smile that seems to deepen when the lights dim. The hair is real, sometimes clipped from actual human heads, making you wonder if at least one of these dolls still has spiritual opinions about what time it should be fed. Let's talk sound. Victorian homes creak, they groan, They settle. But nothing is quite as unnerving as the soft clink of porcelain when a doll accidentally shifts. You freeze, you listen, you tell yourself it was gravity. But gravity doesn't explain why the doll you left facing the fireplace is now angled slightly toward you. Victorian parents, of course, find your fear hilarious. They brag about these dolls the way modern parents brag about organic snacks or Montessori toys. Look at the detail, they say proudly, lifting a doll with terrifyingly realistic eyelashes. She looks almost real. You nod because disagreeing feels like a challenge to the doll itself. Some dolls have built-in voice mechanisms. This is where things take a turn. Picture a tiny metal cylinder inside the doll's torso. You pull a string or move the arm, and it emits a sound intended to mimic speech, but lands somewhere between a sigh, a wheeze, and a cryptic warning. Victorians call it adorable. You call it a sign to immediately exit the premises. You watch a child host a tea party with her dolls. The dolls are arranged carefully, each one staring at its cup with unsettling focus. The child pours imaginary tea, chatting animatedly. You try to relax until she looks you dead in the eyes and says, "They told me a secret." You blink. She blinks. The doll blinks. You reconsider every decision that brought you here. Nighttime is worse. Dolls in gaslight take on a shimmer that blurs the line between inanimate object and small Victorian ghost with a side hustle. Their shadows stretch across the room like they're reaching. You attempt to sleep, but then you hear it. That soft porcelain tap, like fingertips on wood. You pull the blanket up to your chin and pray these dolls don't believe in midnight walking tours. Victorians saw dolls as emotional training tools, miniature versions of adulthood, preparing children for future domestic life. But as you lie awake, surrounded by tiny glass eyes that definitely weren't this close earlier, you realise something important. You're not learning emotional regulation, you're learning vigilance. Because here in Victorian England, the dolls aren't just toys, they're witnesses, they're decorations, they're possibly sentient, and they're all staring at you. Victorian doctors prescribe you mercury for a headache and arsenic wafers for complexion issues. The cure is worse than the plague, but they seem very confident about it. Let's begin with the doctor's office you've just stepped into. A cosy little room filled with dark wood, dusty books, and enough bottled chemicals to qualify as an early prototype of a supervillain's lab. The doctor greets you warmly, gives your hand a friendly shake, and then casually begins listing poisons he'd like you to ingest before lunchtime. He has the calm confidence of a man who has never once questioned whether his medical degree should have come with a warning label. You sit down, describe your symptoms, and he nods sagely. Headache, mercury, fatigue, laudanum, which is basically opium wrapped in Victorian optimism. Dizziness, a dash of strychnine, because apparently the best way to fix a body is to terrify it into behaving. You start to realise that the Victorian medical philosophy is something like, if it stings, burns, or might make you see God, it's probably helping. He rummages through his cabinet and hands you a tin labelled arsenical complexion wafers. The label has a picture of a smiling woman who definitely did not read the ingredient list. He explains that arsenic brightens the skin. You can't help wondering if it brightens it because it thins the boundary between this life and the next. Victorians had an intense relationship with poison. Arsenic was used for beauty, mercury was used for syphilis, and heroin was marketed as a gentle cough suppressant for children. You stare at a bottle of soothing syrup on his shelf, which proudly advertises opium as its active ingredient. The doctor calls it safe and effective. You call it a nap with consequences. Let's talk diagnostics. Victorian doctors don't have x-rays, blood tests, or basic hygiene. What they have is intuition, and that intuition is often fueled by brandy. He places 2 fingers on your wrist, closes his eyes dramatically, and announces that your pulse indicates a mild imbalance of humours. His solution? A good bloodletting, of course, because nothing screams medical progress like draining precious fluids from a patient who walked in upright. He shows you the instruments, gleaming lancets, leeches stored in a jar like overly affectionate pickles, and a bowl he refers to as a recovery vessel, which is a poetic way of saying bucket. You politely suggest perhaps not draining the life out of you today, and he looks genuinely disappointed, like a chef who just had his signature dish rejected. If you refuse bloodletting, he pivots smoothly to cupping. This involves heating glass cups and suctioning them to your back until you look like you lost a fight with a herd of very determined octopuses. Victorians swear by it. You're pretty sure it's just recreational bruising. And then there's laudanum. He offers it to you with the same tone modern doctors use when recommending hydration. Laudanum is opium dissolved in alcohol, which makes it simultaneously a sedative, a painkiller, and a one-way ticket to horizontal living. Everyone takes it. Mothers, labourers, children, stressed husbands, and anyone who accidentally made eye contact with societal expectations. After one sip, you understand why the entire nation spent most of the 19th century floating gently above their responsibilities. As the doctor continues listing remedies, you notice none of them sound remotely safe. Tonic for nerves, ammonia, tonic for digestion, chalk mixed with alcohol, tonic for melancholy, straight-up cocaine. And yet he looks so calm, so reassured by his shelves of volatile chemicals, that you almost believe him. But here's the truth. Victorians weren't being dramatic. They genuinely believed poison could heal. Science was young, germ theory was new, hand washing was optional. Most treatments had to be invented through trial and catastrophic error, and error was plentiful. You leave the office clutching a paper bag of medical disasters, while the doctor waves cheerfully and wishes you a swift recovery. You step outside into the smoggy London air and wonder whether your symptoms will kill you first or the remedies will beat them to it. People pay good money to sit in haunted basements hoping a ghost will tug their hair. You're not sure if the supernatural is real, but the mould definitely is. Victorian ghost tourism is less a hobby and more a national pastime. The moment you arrive in town, someone hands you a pamphlet titled Authentic Encounters with the Beyond, complete with grainy sketches of sad ghosts floating dramatically near staircases. You're ushered toward a historically active basement that looks suspiciously like a damp cellar someone forgot to clean since the Corn Laws. The air is cold, the floor is uneven, and the smell is, well, let's call it aggressively atmospheric. Victorians truly believe the boundary between the living and dead is thin, like a curtain, or the wall insulation they absolutely do not have. They flock to haunted inns, abandoned factories, tragic mansions, foggy crossroads, and anywhere someone once tripped, coughed, or died mysteriously. Which, in Victorian England, is practically every building. As you descend into the basement, a guide whispers, "Many spirits roam here." You nod politely, trying not to inhale too deeply because the spirits aren't the ones giving you respiratory problems. It's the century-old mildew thriving in the corners like it pays rent. Your shoes squelch on the damp floor. A ghost might tug your hair, but the real danger is catching a disease older than the British Empire. Everyone gathers in a circle, clutching candles with the shaky enthusiasm of people deeply committed to becoming anecdotal evidence. The guide tells a tragic backstory involving heartbreak, betrayal, and a missing pocket watch, because Victorian ghosts never simply died. They always perished dramatically, usually while clutching a handwritten note and a symbolic item. Then comes the waiting, and the whispering, and the dramatic gasps from people who clearly want something paranormal to happen, so they can feel morally superior to skeptics. Someone claims to feel a cold breeze, someone else says their coat was tugged. You check your surroundings and discover the cold breeze is a draft from an unsealed window, and the coat tugger is probably a mouse with strong work ethic. Victorian ghost hunters bring equipment too, early EMF meters made of brass, compasses they insist are reacting to spirits and not iron pipes, and notebooks titled Observations of Eerie Phenomena, where they record things like lamp flickered, possibly ghost or felt, sad for no reason supernatural. You consider telling them that sadness is just life in Victorian England, but it doesn't feel like the right moment. Then the guide dims the lantern further, always a bold choice in a mould-infested basement. He asks the spirits to give us a sign. The group holds its breath. Your candle sputters dramatically, which is perfect timing, but also probably due to the damp air slowly suffocating the flame. A woman shrieks softly. Someone clutches your arm. A man in the back triumphantly announces, "A presence is here." You nod, because medically speaking, so is the fungus. The guide claims the basement ghost likes to tug hair, pinch elbows, and occasionally whispers secrets. You wait. You feel nothing. Then you remember you ducked under a cobweb earlier, so honestly that may have been your haunting right there. Victorians don't care. They want ghosts the way modern people want likes on social media. Validation through vibes. Ghost tourism becomes even more intense when you visit stately homes. Hosts lead guests through dim parlours and creaky staircases while telling stories about widow spirits who wander the halls searching for lost loves, children who giggle at midnight, and former butlers who still try to enforce curfew. The guests nod solemnly. You nod politely while mentally tripping over the loose floorboards. But here's the thing. As absurd as the whole spectacle is, you can't deny the appeal. Life in Victorian England is hard, bleak, and full of arsenic wallpaper. Death is everywhere, common, close, and terrifying. Spiritualism gives people comfort. It lets them believe their loved ones aren't gone, just relocated to a nearby dimension with questionable lighting. As you leave the haunted basement, brushing cobwebs out of your hair and praying the damp smell doesn't cling to your clothes, you realise something important. You still don't know if ghosts are real, but you're 100% sure that this basement violates at least 6 modern health codes. Victorians believed dying properly was an art form. There are rules, outfits, weeks of preparations, and apparently you're already behind schedule. Let's begin with the atmosphere, because Victorian death isn't a quiet, personal moment. It's a full-scale event with more steps than assembling a Swedish bookshelf. You walk into a household where someone has just passed, and suddenly everyone is moving with the solemn efficiency of a backstage crew on opening night. Mirrors are draped in black cloth, clocks are stopped at the exact minute of death, and furniture is rearranged not for flow, but for mourning aesthetics. The phrase "a good death" doesn't refer to going peacefully. No. It means you died at home, surrounded by family, and ideally delivered some dramatic final words, something poetic, something quotable. Victorians loved last words the way we love viral tweets. You unfortunately haven't prepared any. If your final gasp isn't suitable for embroidery on a pillow, people will talk. The preparations don't end at the moment of death. In fact, that's when the real work begins. A designated family member, usually the most emotionally stable, which narrows the options significantly, gently closes the eyes of the deceased while whispering something tender. Then comes the washing, the dressing, and the arranging. The deceased must look serene, thoughtful, and photogenic for the inevitable portrait. Victorians truly believed dignity extended beyond the grave, and nothing says dignity like floral arrangements and a perfectly arranged fringe. You watch as mourning clothes are brought out from storage. Entire wardrobes exist solely for grief. Women don't just wear black, they wear layers of it. Matte black, jet black, mourning crepe black. Fabrics so dull they absorb light like emotional sponges. Men get a simpler dress code. Black suit, black gloves, black hat. Children black, ribbons. Even the pets occasionally sport little black collars, which is both adorable and deeply unsettling. Then there's the timeline. Mourning has phases, strict ones. Deep mourning, half mourning, transitional mourning. You don't simply dip into grief. You follow a choreographed schedule of sadness. Deep mourning means total monochrome and emotional restraint. No parties, no social visits, and definitely no smiling too broadly unless you want the neighbours to judge you into oblivion. Half mourning allows muted colours, lilac, grey, deep lavender, as if your heartache is slowly fading into pastels. Victorian society polices mourning with enthusiastic intensity. If you return to colourful clothing too soon after a spouse's death, prepare for scandal. If you mourn too long, people worry you're being dramatic. It's a very narrow emotional hallway to walk through, and you're given no map. Let's not forget mourning accessories. Jet jewellery, glossy black stones carved into brooches, rings, lockets, becomes the emotional merchandise of grief. Inside these lockets, there's often a curl of the deceased's hair, creating a wearable memory that's equal parts sweet and eerie. You are shown one. It is labelled Mother, 1849. You nod solemnly and try not to picture it wriggling. And then come the social rituals, mourning visits, condolence letters, black-bordered stationery, all of it meant to show respectability. Families send out cards announcing the death with an elegance modern paper companies can only dream of. Some Victorians even hire professional mourners to wail convincingly, because nothing says sincerity like outsourcing your grief to someone with theatrical training. Religion adds another layer. A priest arrives to speak of eternity, virtues, salvation, all while gently inching past the mourning wreath on the doorframe. Candles are lit. Hymns are sung off-key by relatives who clearly practice mourning more often than singing. But here's the strangest part. Amidst all the formality, the rules, the decorative despair, Victorians find comfort. Grief becomes structure. Structure becomes survival. These rituals help them make sense of loss in a world where death is constant, unpredictable, and always too close. As you step outside for fresh air, or what passes for fresh air in Victorian England, you realise something. This isn't just mourning, it's project management with tragedy. And according to the schedule, you still have 3 more phases to complete. Evening plans. Let's go watch people with unusual conditions get displayed like exhibits. The Victorian version of reality TV, but ethically worse. You barely finish dinner before someone brightly asks if you'd like to join them at the exhibition hall, which is Victorian code for trauma but with footlights. It's astonishing how casually they bring it up. We're going to see the bearded lady and the human skeleton, your neighbour, says, as if inviting you to a book club or a mild stroll. You nod politely while fighting the instinct to sprint in the opposite direction. The exhibition tent smells like sawdust, stale popcorn, candle smoke, and faint moral discomfort. Gas lamps cast flickering shadows along the canvas walls, giving every silhouette a haunted angular look. Victorians shuffle in excitedly, children clutching peppermint sticks, adults whispering dramatic backstories they definitely made up. You take a seat on a wooden bench that creaks like it's auditioning for its final performance. The show begins with a barker, the Victorian hype man, shouting over the crackling lanterns. His voice rings out across the tent, promising wonders, oddities, marvels of God's unusual handiwork. In modern terms, he is essentially clickbait in human form. The crowd leans forward eagerly. You lean backward, cautiously. Then, one by one, the performers arrive. There's a man labelled the human skeleton who is painfully thin due to a medical condition, but Victorians don't see that. They see novelty. The crowd murmurs approvingly, as if admiring a painting instead of a suffering human being. Next comes the bearded lady. whose magnificent beard is treated as spectacle instead of normal hormonal variants. She gives a polite nod to the audience, the same brittle controlled smile you see on people who've worked too many customer service shifts. Then the giant appears, 7 feet tall, wearing tailored clothing that barely contains the proportions of his frame. People gasp. Children stare. One man elbows his wife in amazement. You watch the giant raise a hand in greeting, slow, deliberate, tired, and you can practically feel the weight of being stared at his entire life. The exhibit continues. The elastic-skinned boy stretches a fold of skin for the audience, eliciting cheers. The tattooed man reveals designs travelling across his arms and chest, elaborate, beautiful works, each with its own story. The crowd doesn't care about the stories, though. They're here for shock value, and as you watch, something unsettling becomes clear. The performers are the only ones acting like adults. The crowd, on the other hand, behaves like toddlers discovering shiny objects. Their fascination mixes with ignorance, forming an uncomfortable cocktail that smells faintly of hot wax and bad decisions. The barker encourages applause, which rolls across the tent like thunder. Performers bow. The audience claps enthusiastically, and you sit there, caught between admiration for the resilience of the people on stage and second-hand embarrassment for everyone else. Victorians justify all this by calling it educational. "We're learning," someone behind you whispers, while simultaneously pointing and giggling. You resist the urge to turn around and explain what learning actually means. But then again, this is the same society that prescribes arsenic for acne. Expectation should be set accordingly. Some performers use these shows to make a living, sometimes the only living available to them in a world that doesn't understand their conditions. They travel, they earn wages, they form communities with each other backstage. But exploitation hangs heavy in the air, settling like soot from a coal chimney. You slip behind the tent after the show, curious. There you find performers drinking tea, chatting, knitting, playing cards, normal people in abnormal circumstances. The bearded lady laughs loudly at a joke someone makes. The human skeleton, bundled in a wool blanket, hums softly while another performer braids their hair. The giant adjusts his coat carefully, mindful of the seams. In this space, the spectacle dissolves, replaced by humanity. It feels gentler here, warmer, realer. You step back into the foggy London night, the echoes of applause fading behind you. Victorians will continue flocking to freak shows for entertainment, for shock, for novelty, but you walk away knowing the truth. Behind the curtain, they're not curiosities. They're just people, surviving a world obsessed with staring. Your teeth ache just from existing. Victorian dental tools look like medieval torture devices, and anesthesia is a suggestion, not a standard. Let's begin with the setting. A small, dim room that smells like a mixture of candle wax, carbolic acid, and regret. The dentist welcomes you with a cheerful smile, revealing a set of teeth that look suspiciously perfect for a man who works in the 1860s. You're not convinced they're his. Behind him, the shelves are lined with gleaming metal instruments that resemble things you'd use to interrogate someone, not clean their molars. You take a slow, steady breath through your nose, because your mouth is already tired of participating. Victorian dentistry is built on 2 core principles: bravery and ignorance. They don't know much, but they make up for it with enthusiasm. You describe your symptoms: mild ache, a little sensitivity, and the dentist nods seriously, as though you've just confessed to something dire. In Victorian England, any dental complaint is treated like a formal declaration of war issued by your molars. The exam begins with a tool that looks like a tiny metal spear. He prods a tooth. You wince. He says, "Yes, yes, inflammation of the nerve," as if he didn't just stab said nerve on purpose. Anesthesia exists, technically. but it's reserved for major surgeries or people the doctor personally likes. For everyone else, there's whiskey, biting a leather strap, or pure hope. He offers you none of these. Instead, he pats your shoulder in a comforting yet wildly insufficient gesture. Before you can protest, he reaches for the forceps, the Victorian dentist's favourite tool. They look exactly like pliers from a toolbox because they practically are. In an era before fillings were common and antibiotics were non-existent, dentists solved everything by removing teeth. Pain? Remove it. Infection? Remove it. Tooth looks at you weird? Remove it. You try to object, but he insists, it is better out than in. This logic also applied to emotions, apparently, because Victorians had no tolerance for keeping those internal either. He positions the forceps around your tooth. There is no countdown, no warning, no gentle build-up. He just pulls. A sharp electric pain shoots through your skull, and you grip the arms of the chair with newfound religious conviction. The dentist grunts with effort. He's really putting his back into it, and for a brief moment, you wonder whether you're about to lose the tooth or the entire side of your face. With a triumphant flourish, he yanks the tooth free. It glistens ominously under the lantern light, and he drops it into a porcelain basin with a tiny horrifying clink. You try to form words but manage only a wounded exhale. Victorian dentists are very proud of themselves. He tells you the extraction was clean, which feels generous considering the amount of blood involved. He recommends rinsing with warm brandy, not for hygiene, but because everyone here believes alcohol can fix anything. Honestly, at this point, you're willing to believe it too. He gives you a tour of other treatments, just in case you'd like to traumatize yourself further. There's filing down enamel with a rasp, cauterizing exposed nerves with heated irons, and cleaning tartar by chipping it off manually like stubborn wallpaper. Victorian dental hygiene is essentially a demolition project performed inside your mouth. You notice a jar of false teeth on the shelf. Some are carved from ivory, others from wood, and a few look suspiciously like they used to belong to someone else. The dentist assures you they're disinfected as much as possible, which isn't remotely comforting. Before you leave, he reminds you to brush with charcoal and maybe chew on soot-soaked rags for good measure. Toothpaste will exist one day, but for now, abrasive powder is your best friend. You nod because it's easier than asking questions your nerves are too tired to hear the answers to. As you step back into the foggy London air, clutching your jaw and reconsidering your relationship with food, you quietly marvel at Victorian resilience. It's not that they were braver, they were just out of options, and honestly, so are you. You pass a cheerful group of 7-year-olds who work 14-hour days in factories. One of them gives you career advice. Victorian childhood is not the soft, pillow-stuffed, woodland creature-themed experience we know today. Here, childhood is less a phase of innocence and more a brief warm-up before you're hurled into the industrial chaos of adulthood. These kids don't have snack breaks and recess. They have wages, bosses, and a cough that sounds like it belongs to someone 3 lifetimes older. As you walk through the streets, you see them everywhere. Tiny, humans with smudged faces and oversized boots, trotting briskly to workplaces that look like the setting of every Dickensian nightmare ever written. One boy, no taller than your kitchen counter, strolls past you swinging a metal lunch pail with the confidence of a middle-aged accountant. He pauses, looks up at you and says, "If you want to get ahead in life, you've got to start early." Then he nods like a wise elder and disappears into a textile mill. Factories dominate the landscape. Massive brick buildings with windows permanently coated in grime loom over the town like disappointed giants. Inside, the temperature sits somewhere between unpleasant and my skin is melting. The air is thick with fibres, soot, and regret. Machines roar, clank, hiss, and occasionally scream in mechanical protest. It's not a place for adults, and yet it's full of children. You watch as a small girl quickly darts under a spinning loom to retrieve a fallen shuttle. She's tiny enough to fit in. Spaces grown men can't reach, which is exactly why she's there. Victorian business owners call this practical. You call it "Where are your parents?" Her mother, of course, is on the other side of the room, also working, also exhausted, also paid barely enough to keep everyone alive. Children work in all sorts of jobs. Chimney sweeping, for example, is considered ideal for boys who are small, nimble, and apparently unbothered by the idea of crawling into dark, soot-filled tunnels where oxygen is optional. Sweeps emerge looking like Victorian raccoons. They smile toothlessly, partly because of childhood joy, mostly because soot has replaced several molars. Then there are the match girls, who dip wooden sticks into phosphorus all day long while their teeth slowly dissolve from chemical exposure. They hum cheerfully as they work, unaware or unwilling to dwell on the fact that their job is slowly turning them into historical cautionary tales. And don't forget the coal mine children, who spend their days underground, pulling carts through tunnels so narrow even your anxiety feels claustrophobic. They often work by candlelight until the candle goes out. Then they work in darkness, guided only by memory and the faint hope they won't walk into a wall. Despite all this, the kids are weirdly upbeat. They laugh, they race each other, they invent games using scraps of discarded machinery. Victorians call them resilient. You call them forced to cope with things no child should. What surprises you most is how skillful they are. A boy no older than 8 shows you how to tie a complex knot used in machinery maintenance. A girl who can't yet write her name demonstrates how she can thread a bobbin in 3 seconds flat. They're competent, fast, and frighteningly accustomed to responsibility. Victorian adults justify child labour with a shrug. It builds character, they say, as though character is best built by risking amputation before puberty. They're helping the family. They're learning a trade. They're small. It's useful. Every excuse sounds like someone trying very hard not to acknowledge the crushing economic reality beneath it all. But the truth is simple. Families need money. Wages are low. Life is hard. And survival means every member of the household contributes, no matter how tiny their hands are. As you watch the children file out of the factory at dusk, soot streaking their cheeks, hair stiff with grime, boots dragging along cobblestones, something hits you. They aren't just little workers, they're little survivors. They don't get childhoods, not really. They get jobs, and if you stand still too long, one of them might try to recruit you. You witness a child being casually lowered into a chimney like a fuzzy little cleaning tool. Is considered adorable. The scene unfolds so casually that you start to question your own moral compass. A small boy, maybe 6, maybe 7, maybe ageless because soot has replaced most of his facial features, stands next to a chimney, bouncing on his toes like he's preparing for recess instead of industrial spelunking. His supervisor, a man with the energy of someone who hasn't unclenched in 12 years, ties a rope around the child with the same tenderness one uses to secure luggage on a carriage. Victorians watch fondly, cooing at the little sweep as though he's a baby duck waddling toward a pond and not a tiny human preparing to risk multiple forms of respiratory collapse. You try to intervene, opening your mouth to say something reasonable like, should he maybe not climb inside a soot-filled death tube? But before you can speak, the boy grins, tips his cap, and disappears into the chimney like a cheerful, coughing magician. Inside the chimney it's pitch black. Not modern pitch black, Victorian pitch black, where the absence of light is so complete it feels like a tax on your soul. The child crawls upward using his elbows, knees, and sheer optimism. Each movement sends a cloud of soot drifting back down into the room, coating everything with a fresh layer of historical regret. The work is as dangerous as it looks. Chimneys vary wildly in width, some wide enough to manoeuvre, others narrow enough that the boy must exhale just to fit through a tight spot. Getting stuck is a common hazard. Children sometimes suffocate, fall, or emerge with burns from lingering embers, because Victorian stove maintenance follows the principle of, well, it's probably fine. The boy coughs, but it's the kind of cough that suggests this is simply part of the job description. You hear scrapes, thuds, and the occasional muffled, "Almost there." Victorian households treat this as normal background noise, like the sound of a kettle boiling, or someone losing an argument with a horse. Meanwhile, the employer waits below with a long rod to knock loose debris and, ideally, not the child. He occasionally taps the chimney to encourage progress, though motivating a small human lodged inside a soot-coated brick tube is simply a matter of polite nudging. Then comes the big moment. The boy emerges from the top of the chimney like a triumphant, exhausted meerkat. He's absolutely covered in soot. He looks like a Victorian charcoal sketch that gained sentience. The crowd applauds. Someone hands him a penny. You hand him a look of deep concern which he doesn't register because he's too busy coughing up what might be the entire Industrial Revolution. Victorian society justifies child sweeps for the same reason they justify most terrible ideas. Utility. Children are small, chimneys are narrow. If adults can't fit, obviously children should. This logic spirals so quickly you realise Victorian problem solving is basically, if it fits, it works. You learn that some chimney masters take training very seriously. They encourage children to stop growing, fewer meals, long hours, tight spaces. A well-fed child becomes a liability. A small one is an asset. The economic math is bleak, but the Victorians nod sagely, convinced this builds character. Not all households are cruel. Some treat sweeps kindly, offering warm food, soft beds, and soap. But even the kindest scenario still involves climbing inside a vertical soot tunnel for pennies a day. The bar for compassion is very low, subterranean low. When the sweep finishes his shift, he joins a group of other children who look similarly smudged and prematurely exhausted. They laugh together, kicking pebbles, sharing stories about near misses inside chimneys like adults swapping office anecdotes. One boy proudly shows a new scar on his elbow. Another says he saw a chimney ghost, which, given the structural integrity of Victorian homes, is entirely possible. As night settles in, you realise something hauntingly beautiful and heartbreaking. These children aren't fearless because the job is safe. They're fearless because fear is a luxury they can't afford, and tomorrow morning, bright and early, they'll climb right back into the soot-filled darkness, tiny, determined, indispensable gears in the great industrial machine. You discover a man digging up corpses for science, or profit, or both. It's unclear and concerning. Victorian graveyards are surprisingly lively places at night, not in the haunted sense, though the fog does make you feel like someone is about to offer you a cursed inheritance. But in the why are there so many humans with shovels after midnight? Sense. You wander in expecting silence, solemnity, maybe a gentle owl hooting. Instead, you get a man ankle-deep in dirt enthusiastically excavating what is very much not his property. He spots you, gives a jaunty little wave and says, "Evening. Lovely night for it, isn't it?" You have no idea what it is, but based on the half-exposed coffin behind him, you assume it's illegal. Here's the thing. In Victorian England, corpses are valuable. Medical schools need cadavers. Surgeons need practice, and society, for reasons known only to bureaucracy, refuses to supply enough bodies legally. So the gap between demand for anatomical study and supply of dead people is filled by the bustling entrepreneurial class known as resurrectionists, grave robbers with a flair for customer service. The man explains this calmly, as if giving you directions to the nearest bakery. He talks about clients, orders, and delivery deadlines. Apparently he's running a full logistics operation in the cemetery. You nod politely while mentally filing this under careers I was not warned about in school. He invites you to observe the process, which is Victorian for please come witness something morally ambiguous. You shuffle closer. The soil is damp. The air smells like wet leaves, candle wax from distant graveside offerings, and the unmistakable hint of ethical discomfort. He works quickly, digging, listening, pausing to check whether any church watchmen are approaching. It's oddly efficient, like watching someone speedrun a very grim gardening tutorial. Once the coffin is exposed, the resurrectionist produces a set of tools: hooks, ropes, a crowbar, and a canvas sack you absolutely do not want to look inside. He pries open the lid with the confident finesse of someone who's opened more coffins than letters. Inside lies the body, pale, stiff, peaceful, and unknowingly about to help advance Victorian medical science via a questionable supply chain. Victorian society has mixed feelings about all this. Doctors quietly appreciate the supply. Police pretend not to notice. Families panic and invest in increasingly absurd anti-grave robbing inventions. You spot several examples nearby: iron cages over fresh graves, concrete slabs, even a coffin alarm bell with a long string attached, because nothing says rest in peace like preparing for multiple types of intrusion. The resurrectionist assures you he treats the bodies with respect. We're doing a lot of heavy lifting in this context. He gently lifts the corpse from the coffin, wraps it in the canvas and slings it over his shoulder like he's carrying a large sack of potatoes with slightly more historical significance. You ask, tentatively, what he earns for this. He names a price so high you begin reconsidering your own career trajectory. No wonder this is such a thriving business. He tells you surgeons pay extra for fresh ones, which is the exact moment you realise your comfort zone has fled the premises. As he prepares to leave, he gives you advice. If anyone asks, you didn't see me. You nod vigorously. You would like to see nothing, know nothing, and forget everything. Just before he disappears into the fog, he adds, "Oh, and don't walk home by the east gate." There's another crew working there. They're not as friendly. You stand frozen as he melts into the darkness, canvas sack bumping against his back like a macabre knapsack. Victorians, pretend this industry doesn't exist, but the truth is everywhere, in whispered rumours, in hurried footsteps near graveyards, in medical journals mysteriously filled with anatomical drawings no one asks too many questions about. You step backwards slowly, careful not to trip over a headstone, and as you leave the cemetery, heart thudding gently, you realise something bizarrely comforting. In Victorian England, even the dead have demanding schedules. Victorians were so scared of premature burial they invented safety coffins with bells. You walk past a cemetery and hear faint jingling, comforting. The sound is soft at first, a delicate tinkling carried by the evening breeze. You pause, tilt your head, and hear it again. Somewhere among the mossy headstones, a tiny bell rings with the cheerful energy of someone trying very hard not to be dead. Your heart rate gently doubles. The Victorians stroll by unfazed, as if bells in cemeteries are just another charming part of neighbourhood ambience, like birdsong or the distant wailing of a coal-dusted child. Victorians had a lot of fears: ghosts, miasma, the French. But being buried alive sat comfortably at the top of the list, and frankly, with their medical knowledge being somewhere between optimistic guesswork and please don't breathe too loudly, their panic was understandable. People frequently fainted, fell into comas, or entered trance-like states from illness, only to be labelled deceased by a doctor who had somewhere else to be. It wasn't uncommon for someone to die, get placed in a coffin, and suddenly reconsider. Thus the invention of the safety coffin, a coffin fitted with a bell, a rope, an air tube, and in some cases, a flag. Because nothing says respectful mourning like installing emergency signalling equipment in case Grandpa changes his mind. You decide to wander deeper into the cemetery, which is probably a bad choice, but the jingling bell is like a historical scream asking for closure. Rows of headstones tilt at uneasy angles, leaning toward you like they're preparing to share gossip. Fog curls through the grass. A crow watches you from its perch with the judgmental stare of a creature who already knows how this story ends. And then you see it. A fresh grave with a string leading from the earth up to a small brass bell. The string twitches. You freeze. The bell trembles, then rings once. A single, bright note that cuts through the mist like a cheerful threat. You look around to see if anyone else is alarmed. They're not. A man walking his dog nods politely and keeps going. You reconsider all your life choices. Victorian families took this fear seriously. Some even kept graves under watch for several days, just in case the recently departed tried to RSVP back to life. They'd place guards, relatives, or unlucky neighbours by the graveside to listen for signs of movement. Imagine drawing the short straw and being told, "Could you sit here tonight, in case Aunt Margaret decides she's not done?" You approach a stone plaque detailing the cemetery's safety interment system, written with the pride of someone advertising the world's least comforting innovation. It explains how a person could pull the rope connected to the bell, alerting attendants who could then dig them out. The plaque also casually mentions that sometimes the bells rang due to weather, rodents, or the rope shrinking in damp air. So basically, Victorian cemeteries had random false alarms all the time. A symphony of maybe someone's alive and maybe it's just a raccoon. Imagine trying to sleep at night with that uncertainty. Loved ones lying in fresh graves while relatives sit awake, ears tuned like anxious owls, waiting for the faintest jingle that might indicate a resurrection, or a very enthusiastic mouse. The fear was so widespread that newspapers ran stories about people waking up mid-funeral, or clawing at the inside of their coffins, or being shockingly discovered alive just before burial. Victorians ate these stories up. They fueled the panic, and the panic fueled entire industries of coffin engineers who proudly advertised features like breathing vents, escape hammers, and guaranteed early warning systems. You continue walking until another bell rings somewhere behind you. This one rings twice. You decide that you've learned enough for today. Because in Victorian England, death isn't just a solemn transition, it's a negotiable contract. And sometimes, the dead need a little help clarifying whether they're actually dead. You meet the poor souls who manually removed waste from homes at night. Their job description is nope. The moment you step into the narrow alleyway behind a row of London houses, you catch a whiff of something that can only be described as a warning from the universe. It's thick, warm, and aggressively memorable. A smell that clings to your lungs and politely informs you it will remain there through several lifetimes. And just when you're questioning your commitment to historical immersion, a lantern glows through the fog and you see them. The night soil men. They move with the resigned determination of people who have seen things no one should see before coffee. Each carries a large wooden bucket, a shovel, or the emotional weight of knowing exactly what's inside both. Their boots squelch through mud that is, let's be optimistic and call it mud. A man nods at you in greeting, lifting his lantern. His expression says, "Please don't ask what I've been doing," and you immediately respect that boundary. Victorian homes don't have indoor plumbing, unless you're wealthy, royalty, or a character in a romantic novel where reality doesn't matter. Everyone else uses chamber pots that must be emptied, regularly. And that task falls to the night soil workers, who travel door to door under the cover of darkness, collecting humanity's most unpleasant exports and hauling them away in carts. You watch as one man approaches a back door, knocks softly and exchanges brief pleasantries with the homeowner. Then, with the solemn silence of someone handling sacred relics, he retrieves a full chamber pot and transfers its contents into his bucket. There is a sound. You choose not to describe the sound. Instead, you compliment the moonlight. The work isn't simply gross, it's dangerous. Night soil men navigate slippery alleys, unstable walkways, and streets where horses contribute generously to the world's existing waste problem. They work around cesspits that could collapse, releasing gases that make even Victorian doctors go, "Oh no, absolutely not." The lanterns flicker, illuminating clouds of steam rising from the night's collected inventory. You try not to inhale too deeply. Oxygen is optional, dignity is not. Despite everything, the night soil men are shockingly efficient. They scoop, haul and dump with practiced rhythm. You watch them empty their buckets into a larger cart, each splash reminding you that noise-cancelling headphones were invented far too late in history. Victorians generally avoid acknowledging this profession. They pretend these men don't exist, much like modern people treat taxes, but the truth is, without them, entire cities would sink into sanitation disasters so catastrophic they'd make modern plumbing commercials weep with gratitude. Night soil workers are the unsung heroes preventing rivers, streets and basements from turning into biological hazards, or at least preventing them from getting worse. One worker explains, kindly, calmly, as if discussing knitting, that the contents of his haul will be transported out of the city and sold as fertilizer. Sold. Meaning someone out there will look at this cart and think, "Ah, yes, agricultural opportunity." You nod, unsure whether to be impressed or horrified, probably both. Victorian resourcefulness walks a fine line between brilliance and "please stop doing that." As you follow the workers down the street, you notice how the city changes at night. The fog thickens. Gas lamps hum quietly. Rats scurry confidently, as if they too are on payroll. The night soil men continue their rounds without complaint. Their breathing is steady, their footsteps sure, their clothes stained in ways no detergent can redeem. They do a job no one celebrates, no one glamorizes, and absolutely no one envies. And yet, there's an odd pride about them, a sense of purpose. They know the city needs them. They know families depend on them. They know civilization quite literally collapses without them. As you part ways, one of them tips his cap and says, "Mind your step." You look down. You do not mind your step quickly enough. Victorian England, a time of grandeur, innovation, and a sanitation system held together by heroic men armed with buckets and too much courage. Everything itches, everything moves, everything squeaks. The Victorian home is less household and more ecosystem. You haven't even sat down before something brushes past your ankle. You look down expecting a stray thread or perhaps a draft. Instead, a rat the size of a small baguette scurries across the kitchen floor like it pays rent. No one reacts. The family barely glances up from their porridge. Apparently this rat has seniority. Victorian homes are alive, and not metaphorically. Every crack in the wall, every floorboard seam, every cosy shadow is a gateway to a thriving population of small, determined creatures. You quickly learn there is no such thing as alone time in this era. Privacy is a concept reserved for ghosts and aristocrats. Let's start with the rats. They're everywhere, under the table, behind the fireplace, in the walls, performing what sounds like nightly athletic competitions. Rats here have personalities. They have roots. They have opinions. One pauses to sniff your boot with the confident energy of someone deciding whether you're edible. You decide not to move. It feels disrespectful. The Victorians tolerate rats the way modern people tolerate terrible Wi-Fi, annoyed, resigned, and deeply aware that fixing the problem is harder than living with it. Some families keep cats, but Victorian cats are not pampered indoor pets. They are feral, Emotionally unavailable co-workers who sometimes clock in, sometimes don't. When a cat catches a rat, the family cheers. When it drops the rat onto the dinner table mid-meal, the family still cheers. You quietly reconsider lunch. Then there are the lice, tiny, stubborn, fiercely loyal creatures that treat human hair like beachfront property. You scratch your head once, then again, then again. At this point, scratching is simply part of your personality. Victorian hygiene practices make lice feel welcome, and frankly, they thrive under these conditions. Soap is rare, water is cold, combs exist, but no one wields them with enough enthusiasm to make a dent in the population. Children, in particular, treat lice as casual companions. You hear siblings compare their head friends, laughing like they're trading collectibles. A mother casually picks a louse from her daughter's hair and flicks it into the fire with the precision of someone who has repeated this motion 10,000 times. You sit there, trying not to think about the fact that at least one louse is definitely contemplating a long-term lease on your scalp. And then come the fleas. Victorians pretend fleas are occasional annoyances, but the truth is, fleas are the majority shareholders of the household. They jump, they bite, they throw tiny parties on your ankles, and they have the uncanny ability to appear exactly where you don't want them. You try brushing one away, but it jumps with Olympic-level enthusiasm onto someone else. The fleas here have careers. Fleas particularly love bedding. Victorian mattresses, often stuffed with straw, rags, or something optimistically labelled soft material, are basically timeshares for parasites. You lie down for a rest and immediately feel movement. Not dramatic movement, but subtle, rhythmic exploration. It's the sensation of insects touring the neighbourhood of your skin like enthusiastic real estate agents. The scratching becomes background noise. The family itches. You itch. Even the cat itches. It's a communal experience, like a Victorian bonding ritual. Someone mentions boiling clothing to kill pests, but boiling is a luxury when your only pot is already busy cooking turnips into emotional despair. As evening falls, you notice the candlelight flickering. Not because of a breeze, no. This time it's the shadow of a rat running across the mantel. Fleas hop energetically in the carpet. Lice tighten their grip. Somewhere in the house, a mouse squeaks proudly, as if delivering a monologue. Victorian homes are bustling, thriving, multi-species communities, a living terrarium of pests and people coexisting through mutual stubbornness and inadequate sanitation. You look around and realise the house isn't infested, the house is shared, and these creatures aren't going anywhere. Not today, not tomorrow, not until plumbing, disinfectant and emotional boundaries are invented. If someone you barely knew dies, you're in black for 2 years. If you like colour too bad, grief has a dress code. Victorian mourning fashion isn't simply a guideline. It's a bureaucratic labyrinth stitched out of jet black fabric and emotional pressure. The moment someone in your social orbit dies, friend, distant cousin, someone whose name you vaguely recall from a Christmas card, society hands you a garment bag and says, "Put this on immediately." You stand there, holding a dress so dark it might absorb your soul if you look at it too long. You quickly learn that mourning isn't just about sadness, it's about rules. Hard, unyielding rules that could fill their own encyclopedia. There's deep mourning, full, half mourning, and transition mourning, each with its own strict fashion requirements. And if you get any of them wrong, society gasps dramatically, fans flutter, and gossip spreads faster than cholera. Deep mourning is the most severe stage. You wear matte black fabrics so dull they actively reject light. No shine, no embroidery, no lace unless it's the saddest lace imaginable. Even your accessories are black: gloves, handkerchiefs, hats, shoes. Your face must exude tasteful despair at all times. You basically become a walking funeral advertisement. You meet a Victorian widow who has been in deep mourning for over a year. Her dress drinks in sunlight like a black hole. She explains with a resigned sigh that she still has 6 more months of full mourning before she's allowed muted grey. Grey. The excitement in her voice is palpable. You nod politely while picturing her sprinting into the nearest fabric shop the moment the timeline allows. Half mourning is where things get wild. You're permitted some colour, but only colours historically associated with wilted flowers or old bruises. Lavender, slate, mauve, lilac, dusty rose. You put on a lilac ribbon and feel like you're committing a crime. Victorians consider these colours a flirtatious whisper of re-entering society. Meanwhile, you're just trying not to attract the judgy stares of women who still have 6 months left in deep mourning and want everyone to know it. Fashion manuals take mourning very seriously. They outline exactly how long each relationship requires you to dress in specific shades. Parents, 2 years. A spouse, up to 4. A friend, 1 year. An acquaintance you spoke to once at a market, several months. A cousin you didn't like, still months. A neighbour's goldfish, honestly, probably a week. And men. Let's talk about men. Their mourning requirement is essentially, please put on a black hatband. Thank you. Meanwhile, women are constructing entire emotional wardrobes. A woman must tailor her mourning dresses, matching bonnets, appropriate veils, jewellery made of jet or hair, preferably someone dead, and gloves so sombre they could be used in a crime novel. Men simply choose a darker tie and call it a day. The veil is the most distinctive item, a heavy black mesh that falls over your face like you're auditioning for the role of mysterious widow number 3. It restricts vision, impairs breathing, and guarantees you'll bump into at least one piece of furniture per outing. Victorian women wore these veils for months, sometimes years, wandering the world in a foggy, suffocating gloom that probably caused more headaches than grief ever did. What's wild is how deeply mourning clothing shapes everyday life. Wearing black tells society how to behave around you. People lower their voices, they offer condolences, they avoid cheerful topics. If you accidentally wear something too bright, Victorians treat it like social heresy. You're practically summoning an etiquette demon. But beneath all the strictness is something oddly touching. Mourning clothing helps Victorians process loss. Grief becomes structured, defined, visible, a shared, recognisable signal that says, something has changed in my life. The outfit does the talking when emotions feel too sharp to voice. As you walk through the streets in your mandated shade of pitch black, you understand why Victorians cling to these rules. Life is chaotic, unpredictable, and full of arsenic wallpaper. Mourning clothing gives order, a timetable, a ritual, a uniform for heartbreak. Still, you can't help thinking modern fashion has one major advantage. No one forces you to dress like a light-absorbing shadow creature for 2 years, because a third cousin sneezed too hard. People wore hats decorated with entire stuffed birds. Some even wore multiple birds. You're afraid to make eye contact with any hat. The first time you see one, you think it's a prank. A woman strolls confidently down the street wearing not a feather, not a decorative flourish, but an entire bird. Wings spread, beak poised, eyes glassy and eternally startled. It looks like she lost a battle with a small hawk and decided to spin the outcome as a fashion victory. Then another woman passes by wearing 2 birds stacked like a feathery layer cake. You quickly realise this isn't a one-time oddity. This is a trend. Victorian fashion has many crimes, but taxidermy hats are perhaps its most chaotic. Milliners advertise these creations with phrases like elegant, tasteful, and ladylike, none of which seem accurate when a hat appears ready to take flight. These hats are architectural feats, towering constructions of fabric, ribbon, wire, and birds who probably did not consent to the afterlife being so social. You step into a millinery shop to investigate. Inside it smells faintly of lavender, dust, and unspoken ethical concerns. Rows of hat stands display everything from sparrows to pheasants to birds, so large they threaten the structural integrity of the building. One particularly bold creation includes an entire owl perched sideways, looking at you like it knows all your secrets and disapproves of most of them. Victorian women try these hats on with utter seriousness. They tilt their heads, they study themselves in mirrors, they debate which bird best says, "I am fashionable, sophisticated, and possibly armed." You hear one lady ask the shopkeeper, "Do you have anything with more wingspan?" He produces a hat so huge it casts its own shadow. The popularity of these hats stems from the Victorian obsession with nature, specifically conquering it. Specimen collecting, hunting clubs, and natural history displays were all the rage. Wearing taxidermy was a way of saying, "Look how cultured I am," and also, "I have a bird on my head." It was status, it was symbolism, it was slightly alarming. Walking down the street becomes an exercise in vigilance. A hat passes so close you feel the whisper of artificial feathers sweep across your cheek. Another woman hurries by in a rush. Her hat wobbling dangerously, you instinctively duck, fearing a rogue bird may attempt a mid-air attack. Even the horses seem uneasy, side-eyeing every passing outfit as if unsure which creatures are alive. The craftsmanship is undeniably impressive. Some hats feature birds posed mid-flight, wings frozen in dynamic arcs. Others include nests with faux eggs, because apparently wearing a single animal corpse wasn't whimsical enough. A few even incorporate small taxidermied rodents, perched in dramatic chase scenes. This is wearable Victorian storytelling, except all the characters are dead. But there's a darker side. The demand for taxidermy hats becomes so overwhelming that bird populations plummet. Hunters scour marshes and forests for exotic species. Entire flocks are wiped out in the name of seasonal elegance. Naturalists beg the public to stop. Women respond by buying more hats, black ones, for mourning, ironically decorated with even more birds. You watch as a gust of wind blows through town. Women stagger, gripping their hats with both hands. Some hats are heavy, dangerously heavy, turning every breeze into a battle between vanity and gravity. A few topple. There's a small parade of escaped birds rolling down the street like tumbleweeds with beaks. Victorians treat it as normal. You treat it as cardio. Later, at a tea shop, you sit beside a woman whose hat features a brightly coloured kingfisher. Its eyes follow you, or maybe that's just your nerves. You try sipping tea, but the bird looms overhead, judging your posture. Victorian taxidermy fashion doesn't just accessorize an outfit, it supervises. As you step outside again, you spot one more hat. A triumphant phoenix-like creature posed majestically atop a mountain of ribbon. The wearer beams with pride. You can't help but admire the confidence required to walk around with a personal aviary above one's scalp. Victorian taxidermy fashion is many things: bold, eccentric, ethically questionable, and probably uncomfortable. But one thing is certain: every hat is watching you, and none of them blink. You attempt to bathe, but the water is cold, the soap is questionable, and everyone swears bathing too often is lethal. Great. Let's set the scene. You enter a Victorian washroom expecting at least a hint of comfort. Instead, you're greeted by a tin tub that looks like it was repurposed from farm equipment and a pitcher of water so cold it might still contain emotional memories from the Arctic. The air smells faintly of damp cloth, soot, and whatever died inside the plumbing system, assuming there is a plumbing system. The floorboards creak ominously, as if they too disapprove of your quest for hygiene. Bathing in Victorian times isn't a daily ritual. It's an event, the kind of event that requires mental preparation, scheduling, and sometimes informal prayers. Most people bathe once a week at best, and many do it far less often. When you announce your plan to wash up, your Victorian hosts look at you with concern usually reserved for medical emergencies. Another bath? Already, they whisper, as though you've confessed to recreational cliff diving. You dip a hand into the water. It is shockingly, aggressively cold, the kind of cold that makes your soul retreat behind a curtain. Heating water requires hauling buckets from the pump, transferring them to a kettle, boiling them over a fire, then pouring them into the tub before the water gives up and becomes frigid again. By the time the bath is ready, so are the goosebumps. The soap situation is worse. The soap is a lumpy greyish block that smells like a combination of lard, ashes and mild despair. It's homemade because store-bought soap is a luxury only wealthy households can afford. You pick it up tentatively. It leaves a filmy residue on your fingers. You're fairly certain it could remove both dirt and possibly a layer of skin. Victorians consider this a feature, not a flaw. Washing your hair is a separate nightmare. Instead of shampoo, you're given a mixture of eggs, vinegar, and maybe some herbs if someone felt fancy during their last market trip. You pour a little onto your scalp and immediately begin to smell like a salad dressing being prepared in cold weather. Victorian beauty manuals insist this mixture builds strength, though you suspect it mainly builds character. As you lower yourself into the tub slowly, because full-body hypothermia isn't on your schedule, you ask why Victorians fear frequent bathing. They explain matter-of-factly that too much bathing weakens the body, disrupts the humours, and might even cause illness. You smile politely while reconsidering every health class you've ever taken. Even the doctor warns you not to overdo it. You nod, even though your definition of overdoing it is bathing twice in one season. Mid-bath, someone knocks, and reminds you not to linger. The family is waiting to reuse your water. Yes, reuse. Bath water is communal, like Wi-Fi in a coffee shop, except it smells worse and does not improve productivity. Parents bathe first, then children according to age, and finally the baby, who gets water so murky it looks like it's been through emotional trauma. As you attempt to scrub your arms, the water turns cloudy. You pretend not to notice. You try to lather the soap, but it mostly smears. You try to relax, but the tub's edges press into your spine with the tenderness of a metal filing cabinet. The candles flicker, casting dramatic shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, a rat sneezes, which feels like a commentary. Even wealthier homes aren't much better. A fancy copper tub might replace the tin one, and servants might heat the water for you, but the mystery substances remain. Powders, oils, salts, tinctures, and tonics with names like complexion brightener or body purifier. Spoiler, most contain ammonia, lead, or alcohol. If the bath doesn't wake you up, the fumes will. When you finally climb out, cold, damp, and smelling faintly of vinegar and ambition, your hosts look relieved. See, they say proudly, a nice, healthy bath. Healthy? Sure. And as you towel off with something that feels like sandpaper masquerading as fabric, you realise Victorians aren't avoiding baths because they're lazy. They're avoiding baths because they know better. Your new corset squeezes you so tightly, you see God, briefly. Victorians call this support. You haven't even finished tightening the laces before your spine files a formal complaint. The corset wraps around your torso like a polite, fashionable anaconda. Someone behind you pulls the laces with the determination of a sailor hoisting a sail in a storm. You exhale, a rookie mistake. Because now, the corset occupies the space where your lungs used to live. You attempt a second breath, but it has to be negotiated in installments. Victorian women insist this is normal. It gives shape, they say cheerfully, as though being shaped like an hourglass forged in a blacksmith shop is the dream. You nod. partly in agreement and partly because nodding is one of the few movements you can still perform freely. They show you their own corsets with pride, rows of tiny, horrifyingly tight laces, stiff whalebone stays, delicate embroidery, and absolutely no regard for internal organ placement. The moment you stand upright, you feel it. The unnatural posture of someone who's being physically coerced into looking elegant. Your shoulders pull back, your waist cinches inward, and your ribcage whispers a soft apology. You try walking. It's less walking and more controlled falling in a straight line. Every step echoes with the subtle tone of "please don't faint." Victorians wear corsets for every activity. Walking, sitting, dancing, courting, existing. Need to bend over? Too bad. Need to eat a full meal? Choose two: solid food, air, or dignity. Even breathing becomes a delicate art form. Small breaths, shallow breaths. The kind of breaths you'd take while hiding from a predator or smelling a suspicious casserole. Your hostess explains the science behind corsets, which is wildly optimistic given the medical accuracy of the time. She insists a properly laced corset supports the spine, improves posture, and strengthens character. You resist the urge to explain that your character doesn't need strengthening, your ribs do. She then demonstrates the corset lean, a graceful tilt achieved not by art but by the limited range of motion. Every Victorian woman masters it. They glide rather than walk, like elegant ghosts haunting their own skeletons. Children, too, wear corsets. This fact alone makes you reconsider every belief you've held about Victorian parenting. Watching a 10-year-old lace herself into a tiny ribcage compression device is an experience so surreal you momentarily forget how little oxygen you're getting. She tightens it effortlessly, and then jogs upstairs while you fight to stay conscious. Throughout the day, you notice the subtle side effects. Your heartbeat feels like it's trying to escape sideways. Your stomach shifts northward in protest. You attempt to sit in a chair and discover that corsets and chairs are natural enemies. Sitting becomes a diplomatic negotiation, requiring perfect spine alignment and the emotional resilience of someone reading tax documents. Then someone suggests dancing. Victorians love dancing. Waltzes, reels, quadrilles. Every event is an opportunity to spin around in socially acceptable, oxygen-deficient circles. You're led onto the dance floor. You take your partner's hand. The music begins. You glide. You turn. You almost collapse twice. People smile warmly at you, assuming your dizziness is romantic swooning and not early-stage medical distress. Corsets aren't just fashion, they're status. A tightly cinched waist signals wealth, beauty and access to servants who can pull laces hard enough to bend steel. Working-class women wear looser, more practical stays, but the upper classes compete for the smallest waist possible. Some women brag about measuring 18 inches. You take a mental note to send them fruit baskets and sympathetic letters. Despite everything, there is a strange beauty to corsets. The craftsmanship is exquisite, the stitching precise, the materials luxurious. And when worn correctly, some women genuinely feel supported, physically, socially, emotionally. It's complicated, like a relationship with a beautiful but demanding partner who occasionally compresses your lungs. As the evening ends, someone finally loosens your laces. The air rushes in like a long-lost lover. Your ribs expand. Your spine cracks gratefully. You experience an emotion bordering on spiritual awakening. Victorians call this comfort. You call it survival. You're invited to a large crowd gathering for an execution. People brought snacks. You arrive expecting something solemn, maybe quiet, but no. This is not a hushed moment of civic consequence. This is Victorian tailgating. Hundreds of people swarm the square, chatting casually as if waiting for a parade or a new bakery to open. Vendors weave through the crowd selling pies, roasted chestnuts, questionable cider, and novelty prints of the soon-to-be executed. Children sit on their fathers' shoulders, waving handkerchiefs. Couples stand arm in arm, pointing out the best viewing angles. Someone literally brought a picnic blanket. You stand there, blinking slowly, trying to process the dissonance. Misery at centre stage, merriment in the stands. Victorians, however, treat this as perfectly normal. It's public justice, they say brightly. You're convinced it's also public therapy, public trauma bonding, and public proof no one had hobbies. The scaffold stands tall at the square's centre, wooden, imposing, and draped in an air of spectacle. The executioner arrives wearing professional expression, as though he's about to give a presentation at a very uncomfortable corporate retreat. His tools gleam in the morning light, polished with the pride of someone who takes job performance reviews extremely seriously. The crowd cheers. You try not to make eye contact with anyone. The condemned prisoner eventually appears, escorted by guards. The crowd murmurs, not out of fear, but interest. Victorians want details. What crime was committed? What were the last words? Did the criminal repent? Did they cry? It's gossip mixed with judgment, mixed with the kind of excitement usually reserved for sporting events. Someone behind you offers commentary like a seasoned sports announcer. Good posture, he says, might go quickly. Another whispers, hope the rope holds this time. You decide immediately you don't want to know the story behind that comment, and then you notice something even stranger. Vendors selling seats on makeshift viewing platforms. Yes, people pay for premium spots, like attending a theatre performance. The well-off lean forward eagerly, opera glasses in hand, snacks ready. You quietly swear the man beside you is enjoying a sausage roll. The hangman clears his throat. The crowd hushes. A collective breath is drawn, not out of empathy, but anticipation. The condemned delivers a final statement, tragic, remorseful, confused, defiant, or sometimes surprisingly banal. Victorians love a good last speech. It's like Victorian reality TV confessionals, emotional, dramatic, and often wildly inaccurate. Then the moment arrives. A drum roll echoes. The executioner steps forward. The rope tightens. The trapdoor falls. The crowd gasps, not in sorrow, but in a synchronized "oh," usually heard when fireworks go off. Some cheer, some cry, some take notes for their newspaper columns or penny dreadful novels. You feel a sinking pit in your stomach while a woman next to you unwraps a candy and says, "Marvellous view today." Victorians genuinely believe public hangings serve a moral purpose, a warning against crime, a display of justice, a reminder that actions have consequences. But just beneath the surface, you can feel the darker truth. The crowd enjoys this, the spectacle, the drama, the communal participation in something grim and theatrical. As the crowd disperses, people chat happily. "Good one," someone says, as if reviewing a play. Children skip alongside their parents, nibbling leftover snacks. A man hawks printed engravings of the event, the Victorian version of souvenir t-shirts. People buy them eagerly. You linger in the now quiet square. The scaffold creaks in the breeze. The cobblestones smell faintly of smoke, cider, and something weightier. You wonder how many lives were ended in this very spot. How many times crowds gathered here pretending justice and entertainment weren't intertwined. Victorian England is full of contradictions, grieving for years over a distant cousin, yet treating an execution like weekend entertainment. It's a world where sorrow is ritualized and violence is scheduled, where moral lessons mingle with morbid delight. As you walk away, you can still hear echoes of the crowd, laughter, cheers, casual conversation, blending with the silent weight of what just happened. Victorians didn't just witness justice, they attended it. Before funerals, families displayed the deceased in their living rooms. You try to sit down and realise someone already called that chair permanently. The first thing you notice when you step into the Victorian parlour is how formal everything feels. Heavy drapes, polished wood, a clock ticking politely, a vase of flowers doing its best to distract from the overwhelming smell of furniture polish mixed with faint melancholy. You're about to compliment the decor when your eyes land on the guest of honour seated upright, dignified, motionless, in the best chair in the room. Victorians don't see this as strange. To them, the parlour is the proper place for good furniture, good conversation, and temporarily good corpses. The family greets you warmly, ushering you inside without the slightest acknowledgement that Great Uncle Herbert is occupying more space in death than he did in life. You hover awkwardly near the doorway, trying to decide whether to make eye contact. This practice is called the laying out, and it's a whole production. The deceased is washed, dressed in their finest clothing, brushed, arranged, and occasionally posed with a level of care normally reserved for royalty or very expensive mannequins. Women often do the preparation themselves, treating it as both duty and ritual. They smooth the hair, they adjust the collar, they tilt the chin upward so the deceased appears thoughtful instead of deeply confused. You try to sit on a chaise, only to be gently redirected because that is Mother's chair. Mother, of course, is the silent figure surrounded by flowers, ribbons, and a decorative shawl draped so artfully you momentarily forget she isn't here to appreciate it. You offer your condolences. The family nods politely. Then they go right back to discussing baked goods, parish gossip and recent weather, because in Victorian England, death is a guest, not a disruption. Visitors stream in throughout the day, each taking their turn to stand before the deceased, sigh thoughtfully, and remark on how peaceful they look. You're not entirely sure peaceful is the word you'd choose. Rigid? Yes. Present, technically. But peaceful? That's subjective. Children wander through the parlour unfazed. One little girl curtsies to the body before skipping off to play. A boy uses the coffin trestle as a makeshift sword-fighting barrier. The family scolds him only because he's being loud, not because he's duelling 2 feet from Aunt Matilda's mortal remains. You ask whether the funeral is soon. They nod. In 2 days. 2 entire days. Which means this parlour setup is not a brief display, it's a full-time roommate situation. Victorian homes relied on cool temperatures, open windows, and an aggressive amount of lilies to keep things comfortable. The flowers aren't just for beauty, they're working overtime to mask the reality of 19th century mortuary science, which is essentially hope for the best. A photographer arrives, pulling a large camera and tripod into the room. Family portraits with the deceased are a common Victorian ritual. You watch as everyone gathers around the parlour chair, arranging themselves with the same sincerity as a holiday photo. A mother adjusts her son's collar. An uncle lifts the deceased's chin just a tad higher. The photographer encourages a long exposure, advising everyone to remain very still. You think, well, one of them will excel at that. As guests continue to come and go, you notice how comfortable the Victorians are with death. They fold it into their domestic spaces, their daily rhythms, their living rooms. Death isn't hidden, it's hosted, welcomed, draped in lace and surrounded by teacups. There's something oddly gentle about it, comforting even. The deceased isn't whisked away immediately to some cold, distant space. They stay home, surrounded by family, included, remembered. But still, when you try to sit again and realise yet another chair is reserved for someone no longer among the breathing, you can't help but think. Victorian parlours have very strict seating arrangements, and none of them involve comfort. You watch a doctor go from dissecting a corpse to delivering a baby without washing his hands. You internally scream. Victorian medicine is many things: enthusiastic, experimental, theatrical, but hygienic is not one of them. The doctor before you wipes his hands on a cloth that has seen better centuries, adjusts his coat, and strolls confidently into the next room as though he hasn't just spent an hour elbows deep in an anatomy lesson. You trail behind him, watching the horror unfold like a nightmare you're too polite to interrupt. The birthing room is warm, crowded, and smells faintly of sweat, herbs, and the unmistakable scent of, oh no. Women bustle around, preparing water, towels, and prayers. The doctor steps in, smiling proudly, unaware that his hands are carrying enough bacteria to start a small country. He greets the expectant mother cheerfully. You inch backward, instinctively trying to put distance between yourself and the cloud of microbial doom. Germ theory exists at this point in history, but only in the same way a rumour exists. A few brilliant scientists have suggested that invisible organisms cause disease. Most Victorian doctors respond with a confident, "That sounds fake," and proceed to rub their unwashed hands across every surface imaginable. They believe disease spreads through miasma, bad air, so cleaning hands seems unnecessary, when the real enemy in their minds is a gust of unpleasant wind. You watch as the doctor reaches for instruments without hesitation. The tools glint in the candlelight, metal, sharp, faintly stained with the ghosts of earlier procedures. They sit in a leather bag that looks more like a cursed treasure chest than medical equipment. He selects one with casual ease, like choosing a pastry from a bakery window. You want to scream again, but quietly, because you don't want to disturb the patient. Around you, midwives exchange nervous glances. They know something is wrong, even if they can't articulate germ theory. They wash their hands because experience has taught them that clean hands help mothers survive. But the doctor, he waves away their concerns with the confidence of a man who has never read research in his life. He begins the delivery, and you feel your soul leave your body. His unwashed fingers, fresh from a dissection, handle the mother with professional precision, but microbial chaos. You picture bacteria cheering, forming little conga lines, delighted with their new environment. You picture Semmelweis, the real historical doctor who proved hand-washing saves lives, screaming across time while no one listens. The mother strains, pushes, trusts. She has no idea the greatest danger in the room is not childbirth, but the man guiding it. You try to subtly edge toward the basin of water, maybe nudge it into his path, maybe accidentally suggest he rinse his hands, but social norms are powerful. The Victorians around you see nothing strange. This is just how medicine works. Victorian hospitals are worse. You've heard stories. Surgeons going from patient to patient without washing tools, coats stiff with dried blood worn proudly as signs of experience, operating theatres packed with spectators who treat surgery like live entertainment. Infections skyrocket. Mothers die at alarming rates. Babies too. But doctors double down, convinced death stems from weak constitutions or uncooperative wombs. As the child finally enters the world, you hold your breath, partly from awe, partly from terror. The baby cries, the room exhales. The doctor beams, wiping his hands again on that same tragic cloth, blissfully unaware he's just risked 2 lives with the enthusiasm of a man rearranging bookshelves. The family thanks him. They offer gifts. He accepts them warmly, believing himself heroic. And honestly, he is, in a way. Victorian doctors are doing their best with limited knowledge, archaic tools, and an unshakable belief in their own correctness. Their confidence is both admirable and catastrophically dangerous. You step outside into the foggy evening, still internally screaming, still shaken by the sight of hygiene practices that could make a hand sanitizer bottle cry. You inhale deeply. The air isn't exactly clean, but at least it's not holding a grudge. And you think, for all the horrors of Victorian England, soap might be the biggest missed opportunity. People sleep clutching amulets to ward off evil spirits who supposedly sit on your chest. You wake up convinced one is currently doing squats on your lungs. Night settles over the Victorian neighbourhood like a heavy velvet curtain, thick, dark, and slightly dusty. The lamps dim, the fires quiet, and every shadow stretches itself dramatically across the walls. You slip into bed, pulling scratchy wool blankets up to your chin, hoping for a peaceful night's rest. But the whispers of the era have already followed you here. According to Victorians, nighttime is when the invisible gets bold. Beside you on the nightstand sits a tiny brass amulet engraved with a vaguely uncomfortable-looking angel. Your hosts insisted you keep it close, for protection, they said, nodding gravely, as if nighttime spiritual assaults were guaranteed and regular like the male. They talked of demons, imps, and malicious spirits who simply adore sitting on people's chests while they sleep. You try to shrug it off. You tell yourself it's superstition. You tell yourself you're a modern thinker. And then your lungs suddenly feel like they're being used as a park bench. You jolt awake in the darkness. The room is still. Too still. The fireplace crackles softly, but the air around your bed feels thick, pressing in, heavy, watchful. You can't move. You try to wiggle your fingers, lift your head, even twitch a toe, but your body refuses, pinned by something you can't see. Somewhere deep in your mind, a Victorian voice whispers, "Ah yes, the night demon has arrived right on schedule." Sleep paralysis exists in the modern world, of course, but Victorians didn't have the vocabulary for it. They had folklore, nightmares, and extremely theatrical imaginations. If they woke up unable to move, with pressure on their chest, they assumed the only reasonable explanation was a demon performing amateur gymnastics on their ribcage. Victorian medical journals describe this condition with phrases like crushing visitations, the midnight hag, and supernatural oppression, all of which feel excessively dramatic until you experience the sensation firsthand. You lie there, eyes wide, heart pounding, amulet clutched in your frozen palm, fully convinced something is perched on your sternum doing little stretches to stay limber. Your eyes scan the dark room. The shadows seem to sway. The curtains flutter slightly though the window is closed. The rocking chair in the corner creaks once, just once, as if someone sat down briefly to supervise whatever is happening to you. You attempt to speak, but your voice is swallowed by the weight on your chest. Victorians had remedies. None of them were helpful. You could sleep upright, uncomfortable but allegedly demon-resistant. You could burn herbs, though they mostly made the room smell like a nervous apothecary. You could place iron tools under your pillow to scare off evil spirits, though that mostly increased your chances of waking up with a concussion. Children were warned not to sleep on their backs because that is how the demon finds you. Adults avoided late-night snacking because spirits dislike digestion. And everyone agreed that sleep was basically a dangerous hobby, best approached with caution and superstitious accessories. The sensation begins to shift. Slowly, gently, your fingers twitch. The weight eases, like the demon is politely stepping off your lungs to check its schedule for the night. You draw a shaky breath. Your vision clears, your limbs loosen. You feel like you've survived something supernatural and mildly insulting. When you can finally sit up, the room looks painfully normal. The rocking chair is still. The curtains rest quietly. The only movement comes from the dying embers in the fireplace. You half expect to see tiny footprints on your chest, or a demon leaving a Yelp review, but nothing remains except the lingering dread of what felt so real. Victorians didn't fear nighttime demons because they were silly. They feared them because the experience is genuinely terrifying, a blend of biology, psychology, and imagination, mixing into one unforgettable midnight horror. As you lie back down, breath steadying, the amulet warm in your hand, you wonder, Was it simply sleep paralysis? Was it just a dream? Or did something unseen really take your ribcage for a joyride? Victorians never solved that mystery, and tonight neither do you. Victorians loved faces, especially dead ones. You're shown a wax death mask of a relative you've never met, moulded directly from their lifeless expression. It's supposed to be comforting, but the glassy stare feels like someone is silently judging your life choices from the afterlife. The mask is presented to you with the reverence of someone unveiling a priceless artifact, though it's really more of a facial souvenir. The wax glows faintly in the lamplight, capturing every wrinkle, every crease, every final moment of a human face frozen in time. Victorians find this touching. You find it deeply motivational, mostly in the sense that you now want to avoid eye contact forever. You hold the mask carefully, turning it in your hands. It's surprisingly heavy, cold, and unsettlingly lifelike. The eyelids are gently closed, but somehow the expression feels open, as if the deceased paused mid-thought to silently evaluate your entire existence. The family watches you expectantly, waiting for your reaction. You smile politely, desperately trying not to drop their dead relative's face onto the carpet. Death masks were a Victorian hobby. When a person died, especially someone important, beloved, or theatrically expressive, families rushed to take a plaster cast of their face before time, decay, or emotional processing could interfere. The cast became the mould for wax replicas, which were displayed on mantels tucked into cabinets, or hung on walls like deeply, uncomfortable conversation starters. You're led to a display shelf holding several masks. Uncle Frederick, your host says cheerfully, pointing to a wax visage with a moustache that could double as a broom. Beside him is Great-Aunt Isabel, whose frozen expression suggests she did not approve of the family cat. One shelf lower, little Tommy, who passed away young, looks eerily serene. A tiny face immortalized in wax, surrounded by lace and dried flowers. In modern terms, it's like a family photo wall, except instead of pictures, it's a collection of hyper-realistic faces staring into eternity and beyond. The making of a death mask was surprisingly practical. Victorian doctors and artists used them to preserve accurate facial features before photography became widespread. Scientists collected masks of criminals, scholars, and interesting skull shapes for research. Artists used them for reference. But families wanted comfort, a final portrait that could not fade or blur. Literal imprint of the last moments. You glance at a mask with an oddly peaceful smile. He died happy, they tell you. Another mask has slightly furrowed brows. She died worried about the roast in the oven. Victorians read emotions into these frozen expressions like palm readers decoding fate lines. The uncanny realism doesn't deter them. It reassures them. Death becomes familiar, domesticated, displayed. You try to imagine what it was like to sit beside a loved one's body while plaster hardened over their face, someone gently smoothing the mixture, someone waiting for it to set, someone lifting it away, leaving behind the strange, fragile imprint of a person about to transition into memory. The intimacy is undeniable and slightly haunting. Wax museums embrace this trend too. Entire exhibits dedicated to historical figures, criminals and saints, featured life-sized wax bodies topped with actual death masks. It was education mixed with eeriness, like attending a lecture in a room, full of people who are sort of there and sort of not. Your host proudly shows you a special mask kept in a wooden box. Our ancestor from the 1700s, he says. You lean in. The mask is cracked with age, wax faded to a soft yellow. Its features are ghostly, but clear enough to recognize the family resemblance. Suddenly you feel 13 generations of disappointment glaring at you through time. You carefully set the mask back down. Victorians believed these replicas preserved dignity. They believe the dead should remain visible, present, part of the household. But as you stand surrounded by silent faces that once laughed, worried, scolded, hoped and breathed, you can't help feeling the weight of all those unmoving eyes. Comforting? Maybe. But mostly it feels like being evaluated by people who forgot how to blink. You take a stroll outside and instantly regret it. Everyone believes disease is caused by bad air, so the streets are filled with people waving handkerchiefs, dipped in vinegar, wearing beak-like masks or stuffing herbs into their pockets like anxious squirrels preparing for plague season. The moment you step into the open air, it hits you. Not disease, but the collective anxiety of an entire society convinced the atmosphere is plotting their demise. The Victorian public has one enemy, and it isn't germs, it's smells. Foul smells, strange smells, even slightly suspicious breezes. Anything that wafts is immediately considered lethal. You watch a woman cross herself as a horse trots by, the hoof-beaten dust rising like a visible omen. Clouds of industrial smog blend with chimney smoke, rotting refuse, and whatever mysterious liquid just leaked from the butcher's shop. To you, it's unpleasant. To the Victorians, it's a medical emergency. People march briskly through the haze, clutching scented cloths to their faces, breathing through lavender-soaked optimism. One man wears an herb pouch so large it looks like he mugged an entire apothecary. A city official strolls past waving a smoke-puffing contraption meant to purify the air. In reality, it looks like he's attempting to summon bees. You politely sidestep the cloud of burning rosemary, which absolutely does nothing except give the street the aroma of poorly seasoned chicken. Victorian fear of miasma, the dreaded bad air, is absolute. They believe disease rises from decaying matter, drifting invisibly into lungs and wreaking havoc. No one questions it. Not the doctors, not the politicians, not even the rat cleaning itself next to a pile of sewage. Everyone agrees the air is the villain, an assassin with excellent range. You pass a group of children holding posies, little bouquets meant to ward off sickness. They giggle as they skip through puddles of questionable origin, completely unaware that the real danger is not floating through the air, but squelching beneath their boots. Still, they cling to their flowers like magical shields. You can't even judge them. You kinda want one too. Along the riverbank, things get worse. The Thames emits an odour so powerful it feels like a physical shove. Victorians stand at the edge holding perfumed handkerchiefs, muttering darkly about death vapours. You overhear one woman swear that the river once looked at her funny. You believe her. The Thames is a sentient creature at this point, and it hates everyone equally. Doctors roam the streets wearing long coats and expressions of absolute confidence. One stops to give a lecture about cholera, pointing accusingly at the air as though he's trying to discipline it. You try to ask about water contamination, the actual cause, and he waves you off with a weary sigh of someone certain you'll never understand real science. Back in the markets, vendors sell protective charms, vinegar vials, sachets of dried mint, tiny amulets shaped like lungs, which is far too on the nose, and masks stuffed with herbs. People browse these items with the same intensity modern shoppers reserve for high-end electronics. You watch a man purchase enough sage to season an entire village. Nightfall brings no relief. If anything, the paranoia intensifies. Lamps glow through the smog, casting shifting shadows that make the fog appear alive. People hurry home, clutching scarves to their faces. A gentleman wearing a plague-era beak mask nearly collides with you. You apologise. He apologises. His herbs apologise. Inside your lodging, you try cracking a window for fresh air. A mistake. A neighbour gasps and hisses. Don't you know the miasma flows strongest at dusk? She slams the window shut with the urgency of someone preventing a demon from entering. You curl up with your blankets, wondering if you accidentally moved into a house of Victorian conspiracy theorists. Yet here's the odd part. Beneath all the chaos and vinegar fumes, there's sincerity. People are afraid. They're trying. They want to protect their families. They want control in a world of invisible threats. They don't know about microbes, but they know fear, and fear loves a simple explanation. So they fight the air, relentlessly, dramatically, incorrectly. And in the foggy, scented haze of Victorian London, you suddenly understand. For them, survival begins with a bouquet of herbs and a very deep breath taken through cotton. In a well-to-do Victorian parlour, you meet someone's beloved cat, except the cat has been dead for months, and now sits eternally on the windowsill, stuffed stiffly with glass eyes that follow you across the room like it's plotting supernatural vengeance. At first, you think the cat is merely exceptionally well behaved, holding a perfect pose as sunlight streams over its fur. Then you notice the fur doesn't quite move with the breeze. The whiskers seem just a bit too rigid, and those glossy eyes, unblinking, unbreathing, entirely committed to watching you like an unpaid security guard, never look away. Your heartbeat performs a gentle somersault. Victorians adore taxidermy. They see it as sentimental, artistic, and for reasons unclear to you, comforting. Their logic is simple. Why say goodbye to a beloved pet when you can keep it? Forever, in your living room, until the end of time. The family matron beams proudly as she gestures toward the late feline. He's just as we remember him, she says, as if this explains why his posture resembles a creature halfway through buffering. The room is a museum of eternal pets. On a side table rests a small dog, preserved mid-tail wag, its mouth fixed in a permanent smile that radiates chaotic canine energy. A canary perches atop a stand, feathers smoothed meticulously, frozen mid-song like it hit the pause button on its own life. There is even, dear heavens, a rabbit posed in a jaunty sitting position, little paws folded neatly, expression saying, "Yes, I am dead, but pleasantly so." Victorian taxidermists were artisans, craftsmen who believed nature should be curated, the same way one arranges fine china. They prided themselves on lifelike poses, glossy eyes, and fur brushed with such loving detail that even in death, the animals could pass for deeply introverted versions of their living selves. Some taxidermists even recreated emotional expressions, joy, alertness, curiosity, which would be adorable if it didn't feel like being watched by the world's quietest jury. You cautiously sit on a fainting couch, though fainting seems like a reasonable next step. The cat's gaze follows you. Its tail, forever curved in a poised arc, hints at mischief it will never again attempt but will forever imply. The family talks casually about dinner plans, the price of coal, and so-and-so's scandalous new bonnet, while you wonder whether the cat is silently evaluating your soul or simply reflecting sunlight at an unfortunate angle. Victorian pet memorialization goes beyond simple preservation. Some people pose their taxidermied companions in elaborate scenes. You've heard rumours of entire displays, cats having tea, dogs holding playing cards, squirrels reenacting famous battles. One family proudly recounts how they once commissioned a display of their terrier catching a rat. The terrier died of old age. The rat did not. The scene, tragically, is still considered a success. Taxidermied pets serve as conversation pieces at gatherings. Guests admire the craftsmanship, comment on the lifelike posture, and politely ignore the queasy feeling of being outnumbered by the deceased. Some Victorians stroke the fur absent-mindedly, as though comforting themselves. You do not. You keep your hands respectfully folded, aware that any unexpected texture could send you directly into the spirit realm. Maintenance is an entire ordeal. The family explains how they dust the cat weekly, brush its fur monthly and keep it away from the fireplace lest it dry out. You nod earnestly, unsure whether you're discussing a cherished memory or an artisanal sausage. They warn you about moths, sunlight, humidity, and vaguely mischievous children, all of which pose existential threats to their immobile companions. And yet, beneath the unsettling stillness, there is genuine affection. Victorians lived in a world where death was constant, intruding into daily life without warning. Keeping a pet preserved felt like a small rebellion, a refusal to let grief erase something cherished. A way to say, you are loved and you will stay with us, even if the staying involved glass eyes and complicated cleaning instructions. As you prepare to leave, you give the cat one last glance. Its stare is unwavering, eternal, mischievous in a way only taxidermy can achieve. You nod politely, because in Victorian England even the pets refuse to leave quietly. You stop at an inn for the night, relieved to rest, until you're shown your bed, which you'll be sharing with two strangers and possibly a very determined weasel. Personal space doesn't exist, and neither do clean sheets. You try to sleep while a man named Albert snores directly into your soul. The innkeeper beams with pride as he gestures toward your sleeping arrangement. A single mattress that looks like it was stuffed with hay, anxiety, and perhaps the remains of previous guests' dreams. The blanket is thin, the sheets vaguely damp, and the pillow gives the impression it once hosted a family of squirrels. Behind you, Albert and an unknown third man, let's call him Harold because he looks like a Harold, shuffle inside carrying boots that smell like coal-dusted despair. Victorian inns are cosy in the same way Victorian medicine is gentle. Not at all. Beds are expensive, space is limited, and hygiene is more of a concept than a practice. Travellers are expected to share beds, and sometimes even blankets, with complete strangers. Privacy is a luxury reserved for royalty or people who die early enough in the day to get their own coffin. Albert climbs into bed first, staking his claim with the confidence of a man who has done this countless times. Harold follows, positioning himself in the exact centre like a human roadblock. You crawl in last, clinging to the mattress edge like a Victorian barnacle on driftwood. The room smells like damp wool, pipe smoke, and a hint of something rodent-adjacent. The weasel, or ferret, or possibly a very bold rat, eyes you from the foot of the bed as if deciding whether you're edible. The mattress dips dramatically, sending you rolling into Harold's shoulder. He grunts. You apologise. He grunts again, which you think means accepted, or possibly I'm asleep. Albert, meanwhile, exhales a snore so deep and resonant it feels like a haunting. Your eyelids twitch. Your soul flinches. Victorian inns are full of noises. Floorboards creak. Guests stomp loudly up staircases. Horses whinny outside. Someone drops a tankard in the tavern below. And your roommates, your very close, very present roommates, contribute their own soundtrack. Snoring, wheezing, mumbling, and the occasional dream-related elbow jab. You stare into the darkness, counting each noise like sheep who have unionized against you. Every now and then, Albert shifts, causing the entire mattress to tilt. You roll slightly toward him. He rolls slightly toward Harold. Harold rolls toward you. It's a human lava lamp of discomfort. You cling to the edge of the bed like a Victorian gymnast performing in an event called Avoid Touching Anyone. Then there's the issue of warmth. Inns provide one blanket, heavy, scratchy, and somehow simultaneously too warm and not warm enough. The three of you tug it back and forth throughout the night in a silent, passive-aggressive battle that feels deeply personal. At one point, Albert wins and burritos himself entirely. You respond by yanking a cornerback with the desperation of a man fighting for his future children. Just as you begin drifting towards sleep, Harold coughs directly into your hair. You sit up, reevaluate your life choices, and decide sleep is a weakness anyway. The weasel takes this opportunity to inch a little closer, its tiny eyes glinting with entrepreneurial spirit. Guests come and go all night. Doors slam, boots thud. Someone down the hall has nightmares involving loud Victorian shouting. You marvel at how anyone in the 19th century slept at all. You marvel at how Albert continues sleeping so peacefully, despite being the exact cause of your insomnia. His snores vibrate the mattress. Your sanity hangs by a thread. By dawn, you've slept a total of maybe 14 minutes. You slide out of bed, muscles stiff, hair resembling a haystack, and a new appreciation for modern hotel reviews. Albert stretches, yawns, and says cheerfully, "Sleep well?" You stare at him, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or check your chest for signs of where his snores perforated your spirit. Victorians see shared beds as normal, practical, economical, even friendly. But you have never understood the value of personal space more in your life. And as you leave the room, stepping over the possibly triumphant weasel, one thing becomes clear. There are many hardships in Victorian England, but this bed might be the one you least survive. You wander into a toy shop expecting whimsy and delight. Instead, you're greeted by sharp metal hoops, exploding cap guns, lead-painted figurines, and a jack-in-the-box so sinister it should come with its own priest. Children here play with things that would get modern manufacturers sued into another dimension. The bell over the toy shop door jingles as you enter, and for a split second you imagine shelves full of plush animals and soft wooden puzzles. But this is Victorian England, where playtime is just early exposure to danger. The first thing you see is a display of metal hoops so sharp they reflect light like predatory creatures. A child grabs one, giggles, and sprints outside to roll it down the street at alarming speed. You wince, fully expecting it to ricochet into someone's shin or slice through a milk cart. A small boy approaches you, proudly showing off his new toy pistol. "It makes a bang," he announces, then pulls the trigger. It makes several. Your ears ring. The shopkeeper beams with pride. "Gunpowder caps," he says cheerfully, as though selling firecrackers to children is a completely normal business model, which here it is. He shows you a larger version with the same enthusiasm someone might use to present a birthday cake. You wander deeper into the aisles, trying not to touch anything with sharp edges. This becomes increasingly difficult when you realize everything has sharp edges. Tin toys with corners like razor blades, spinning tops capable of denting floorboards, jump ropes with handles made of the densest wood known to mankind. Even the dolls look like they could win a knife fight. The lead-painted figurines sit ominously in a glass case. Soldiers, horses, farm animals, all coated in colours so vibrant you can practically taste the toxicity. Children scoop them up, chew on them, and reenact battles with gleeful abandon while slowly absorbing enough lead to qualify as metal alloys. The shopkeeper assures you the paint is perfectly safe. His left eye twitches slightly, which does not reassure you. Then you meet the jack-in-the-box. It sits innocently on a shelf, hand-painted in cheerful colours, musica ready to be cranked. You turn the handle once, twice. The melody plays. You feel dread. The lid springs open with a force that suggests demonic influence, launching a clown so intense it might actually steal your wallet. You step back, heart racing. A child claps happily. "He surprises you," they say. You nod weakly, resisting the urge to salt the earth around it. Victorian parents browse the shop with complete calm, picking up items like sawdust-filled rag dolls, flammable, weighted slingshots, dangerous, and chemistry sets containing substances that should never be near unsupervised children or adults. One mother purchases a small cannon for her son, a cannon. For target practice, she explains, you don't ask what the target is, you don't want to know. Outside, children play with stilts taller than they are, swing from ropes tied to questionable load-bearing beams, and toss heavy iron balls back and forth as if gravity is merely a suggestion. A pair of siblings duel with wooden swords that look capable of cracking ribs. No one intervenes. No one worries. This is simply childhood. And here's the thing. Victorian toys aren't just dangerous, they're educational. They prepare children for life in an era where everything wants to kill you anyway. Falls, burns, cuts, poison, blunt force trauma. These toys offer a preview of adulthood. Build resilience, Victorians say, as a child accidentally lights a small fire using a magnifying glass in direct sunlight. Back inside, you examine a stuffed animal. Something soft may be safe, but no. It's filled with sawdust, buttons sewn on loosely, and the stitching suggests one enthusiastic tug will release a cloud of flammable fluff. You gently place it back, whispering a small apology. At the front counter, you see a display labelled Toys for Toddlers. The items include marbles, choking hazards, miniature hammers, self-explanatory hazards, and a pull-along cart that looks suspiciously like it doubles as a mousetrap. You decide toddlers in Victorian England must simply evolve faster. As you exit the shop, children race past you waving their new toys triumphantly, a whirlwind of noise, sharp metal, smoke, and questionable engineering. You marvel at their survival. You marvel at the era. And you leave with one overwhelming thought. Victorian childhood wasn't just playtime. It was training for a world with no safety rails and absolutely no warranty. And so tonight, you've survived another full day in Victorian England, a place where everything looked elegant on the surface but was secretly held together by arsenic, soot, superstition, and questionable medical decisions. You wandered through smog thick enough to butter toast with, wallpaper that wanted you dead, doctors who refused to wash their hands, and ghosts who were treated with the same level of respect as actual living relatives. You've braved mourning rituals that lasted longer than most Victorian marriages, dolls with human-like eyes, jewellery made from hair that used to be attached to someone with feelings, and children casually working in chimneys like it was an after-school club. Honestly, you've handled all of this with more dignity than any Victorian ever could. You came in wearing wool, stayed for the arsenic wallpaper, and somehow managed not to inhale too deeply. That alone deserves applause. But as absurd, eerie, and unintentionally comedic as life here was, the Victorians were resilient in their own strange way. They lived through industrial chaos, crushing grief, and a constant background hum of danger, and still found room for love, hope, music, badly stuffed taxidermy, and the occasional ghost-themed dinner party. They made beauty out of darkness and ritual out of sorrow, not because life was easy, but because they insisted on carving meaning out of the mess. So tonight, as you settle deeper into your warm, clean bed, with soft sheets, breathable air, working plumbing, and absolutely no arsenic hiding in the walls, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the past. To the people who endured all the weirdness, the discomfort, and the outright nightmares, so you could fall asleep to stories instead of smog. Because history may be strange, grim, and sometimes hilariously awful, but it's also a reminder that humans are stubborn, creative, hopeful creatures who survive things they absolutely should not have survived. And now, let that thought soften your breathing. Let the day melt away. Let your mind drift somewhere dim and peaceful, far from coal smoke and creepy dolls. You're safe, you're warm, and your walls aren't trying to poison you. Rest well and good night.